Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 501. You're accusing me wrongly. Mei Shui Yan didn't think much of the illusory ocean of Blood's people. But Jun Moxie was aware that his family wasn't strong enough to think this way. Therefore, he couldn't allow these men to leave since he had been presented with this excellent opportunity. After all, the genuine strength of the Jun family would be brought to light if these men were allowed to walk away. How could someone so evil allow that to happen? The best quality of an evil man is to kill his enemy when the latter is an ignorant and confused state of mind. But wouldn't something like this also leave one to feel a sense of accomplishment as well? How can you be so hypocritical? The Snake King glared wide-eyed at him in displeasure. That sword attack of yours was extremely quick. In fact, it could easily be counted amongst the 3 fastest sword moves I can recall. Mei Shui Yan slowly raised her eyelids and looked at Jun Moxie. But you shouldn't have killed him. You really shouldn't have. Mei Shui Yan had been profoundly shocked by such a fierce sword attack. And she was even more shocked by the fact that such a sword attack had been launched by Jun Moxie. That sword had only appeared for a fraction of a second, but its appearance had still been earth-shaking. The sword's light had vanished by now, and the person targeted was dead too. But the magnificence of that sword's flash was still resonating in the hearts of the 2 women. The Snake King had begun to take young Master Jun in a different light even though she hadn't revealed any change in her attitude. And that's because she was aware that she too wouldn't have been able to evade that sword if she had been in that black-clothed masked man's shoes. That sword is a godly weapon. Mei Shui Yan had faced many enemies over the course of her life. And most of them had been great master category experts. But she had to admit that Jun Moxie's sword was amongst the best she had ever seen. Why should I not have done it? Are you implying that I should have welcomed him even though he tried to storm my Jun family's residence this late at night? How is that reasonable? Jun Moxie snorted and raised his eyebrows obliquely. I'll kill anyone who offends me. There's no margin for negotiation when it comes to this. There would never be. And this one. He pointed his finger at the other man from the illusory ocean of blood, the one who couldn't move since he was being held captive by the world cage. I can't allow him to leave either. But they're from the illusory ocean of blood. Mei Shui Yan stared fixedly at Jun Moxie's face. And the illusory ocean of blood is an indispensable force when it comes to the battle for seizing the heavens. And your attack has messed things up to a point where there's no room for saving this situation. I've left no room for saving the situation. There was never any to begin with. Anyway, would you genuinely rely on this man when it comes to the battle for seizing the heavens? Haha. Are you joking with me? You want to depend on these donghua people? Jun Moxie laughed wildly. I had heard you say that the 3 holy lands have many amazing experts. But they don't compare to such a reputation now that I've seen them myself. These guys are so sloppy. In fact, I believe that these 2 great masters would find our old Falcon too much to handle. These 2 certainly possess the Xian strength of great masters. But they are absolute rookies apart from their cultivation level. These 2 would die facing solitary Falcon's experience if we judge fairly. In fact, they wouldn't even last 100 moves. Even I have enough strength to kill them. You were hiding in the sidelines. You brat. Mei Shui Yan snorted coldly. Her expression was icy. You exploited the fact that we had obstructed your powerful enemy. So, you must be feeling good about yourself, right? Where is young Mei bringing this up from? Jun Moxie had an innocent expression on his face. I've been training this entire time in order to increase my strength for when the need arises. I had barely ended by practice a moment ago. I was coming over when I saw that these two were sneaking in to carry out their despicable operation. But I then realized that these two were exceptionally strong great master level experts. So it would have been disrespectful towards these two if I had rashly gotten involved. After all, I'm merely at the insignificant Sky Xian realm. And that isn't nearly enough to contend against the powerhouses of one of the legendary Holy Lands. So I hid in the sidelines with the intention of seizing the advantage when it presented itself to me. But who would have thought that their skills would be so sloppy? What's wrong with me doing this, if I may ask? And you're throwing false accusations at me when we come to the aspect of me taking advantage of your actions. How could I ever harbor such thoughts? This young master has always been straightforward and chivalrous. He's always had a sword-like gutsy heart. How can someone as open-hearted as me do such a thing? Young Mei accuses me wrongly. This is grave injustice. Mei Shuayan looked at him for a long time. But she eventually sighed and said, I've walked through the mortal society for a long time, young Master Jun Moxie. But your skin is the thickest of all the people I've seen. You flatter me. Young Mei, you flatter me too much. Jun Moxie didn't look embarrassed by any means. Instead, he seemingly had a clear conscience as he sat down. You won't admit that you had planned this since the start. So how come these people came to me for the bone-tempering pills? Mei Shuayan saw that Jun Moxie's facial expressions made it seem as if he was innocent of all crimes. Therefore, she spoke up in an icy cold voice. Moreover, how come you arrived here at such an opportune moment if you hadn't planned this from the start? Can you please give me rational explanation? You're treating me even more unjustly now. I've been urging my master to make time for refining pills for you just for you. I had requested him, urged him, and even shamelessly heckled him till he finally came up with the proper pills for you. My master had given those pills to me only moments ago. And that's why I had decided to rush here at this time. I give this deed great importance. So I didn't wish to delay delivering these pills to you. But who knew that? But you say that I've conspired to bring about this incident. I feel like dying. Jun Moxie's face displayed a plethora of expressions. It seemed as if a soldier had been wrongly pushed down a mountain's peak for causing disturbance in the army. There was a sense of concealed bitterness on his face along with a trace of extreme grievance. It seemed that he felt dejected because he had been accused wrongly without being given a chance to explain himself. Those expressions were vivid and realistic. He had truly imitated them to perfection. In fact, it seemed as if they came straight from his heart. They even seemed to be his instinctive reaction to her words. What's this? Mei Shuayan blinked as she closely looked at his facial expressions. They don't seem to be fake. Consequently, she felt a bit guilty. This time, it seems that I may have accused you with false allegations this time. How is it, may have? You have genuinely accused me with false allegations. Jun Moxie secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Then, he started to sound increasingly self-righteous. I don't blame you sisters for saying that. After all, you two sisters have garnered experience over the many years you've traveled through this world. Moreover, there's nothing wrong with being a little suspicious. But to be suspicious of those on your own side. I'm really, absolutely, unexpectedly, you've broken my heart. His fingers trembled. In fact, his entire body trembled. His face had also turned somewhat red. His eyes were glaring at her tiredly. It seemed that he was evidently feeling hurt. However, he was laughing inside for getting away with it in reality. Hum. Mei Shuayan felt somewhat embarrassed. So, she coughed a few times. She couldn't even think of how she ought to word her phrases at this time. Then, young Mei quickly gave a meaningful glance to the Snake King. She had instructed the Snake King to leave by doing so. Therefore, Green Hunter left in silence since she didn't wish to wake Guanqing Han. Only the sounds of a grumbling stomach were coming from Guanqing Han's room at this time. Young Master Jun, ahem, thanks for your trouble. Mei Shuayan was the lord of Tianfa. When had she ever apologized to anyone else like? In fact, someone with her cultivation was even left to blush a bit for the first time. This was the first time she felt at a loss. In fact, she had even resorted to the use of honorifics. Mei Shuayan hesitated for a moment when she saw that Jun Moxie's face resembled that of a newly married woman who felt that she had been mistreated. However, she then remembered that he had mentioned about those divine pills he was carrying. So, she bit her teeth and said, "Young Master Jun, those." Jun Moxie twisted his waist and cocked his head. He had increasingly started to look like a young wife who had been offended. "Young Master Jun, please don't get mad." Mei Shuayan spoke cautiously. She didn't know how to deal with Jun Moxie's grievances. It must be mentioned that Mei Shuayan was an exceptionally strong expert. But she was somewhat lacking in confidence at this juncture. Even Mei Shuayan had been left startled by her own conduct when she had spoken those lines. "What's wrong with me?" Jun Moxie had started to imitate Dugu Xiaoyi's pout by now. Then, he suddenly realized that it wasn't very manly. So, he sighed and spoke. "Forget it. It's only normal that you'll have doubts whilst making friends with someone for the first time. Moreover, you had said those words unintentionally. So, I forgive you." Mei Shuayan breathed a sigh of relief. She still harbored some doubts, but she didn't voice them rashly at this time. For example, those two men didn't go looking for you. Why did they come straight to the female's abode to look for the bone-tempering pills? How can you explain this? However, she kept her questions to her since she had seen Jun Moxie behaving in that manner. It was like facing a girl who had been humiliated over the course of her mission. I don't know, those pills. Jun Moxie again pouted. He then looked towards that unlucky old man from the illusory ocean of blood who was still imprisoned inside the world cage. His indication was rather obvious: this secret can't reach his ears. And that pitiful man's face instantly got painted in colors of panic. Mei Shuayan frowned a tiny bit. She grabbed that man and tossed him out. Mei Shuayan had seemingly grabbed that man in a gentle manner. However, Jun Moxie had clearly noticed that she had destroyed his dantian. She had even attacked his internal organs while doing so. Then, her aura had attacked his head. In fact, Jun Moxie estimated that the insides of that man's skull must have been left in shambles because of this. After that, he heard a slight pat sound as that man's body was thrown away. But no sound was heard afterwards. It must be mentioned that this old man had felt like venting his anger on Jun Moxie. However, the masked man didn't even get enough time to snort before he was turned into a corpse. These two great master-level experts had been executed so miserably that they hadn't even been able to utilize their skills. It had to be said that their luck was very bad. After all, their combined strength would have seemingly been able to cause utter chaos in the world at large if the Jun family's residence hadn't been their first stop. However, They had been doomed to such a sullen death here. Moreover, they hadn't been able to make any heads or tails of their deaths. In fact, they couldn't even figure out what was happening here. It was very sad. That's good. Jun Moxie secretly gave a thumb up. I feel very relieved since you've destroyed his corpse yourself. After all, I was very afraid that you would start interrogating him. I would have been done for if he had confessed that Tang Yuan had told him that the bone-tempering pills were here. Wouldn't you be looking to settle the debts with this young master if you had found that out? After all, a great expert such as myself would have had to apologize in that case. These pills. A jade green bottle silently appeared within the palm of Jun Moxie's hand. However, his expression seemed pained. After all, this was the result of his third attempt. He could make hundreds of 10 years pills in one attempt. But he had almost worn himself to make 6 of these vitality linkage pills. This output is extremely ridiculous. What pills are these? What's their specific effect? How much strength can they increase? Mei Shuiyan's eyes shone. She had tried to restrain herself, but her voice still seemed to be brimming with nervousness. After all, this was related to the future of the Tian Fa forest. This is the vitality linkage pill, it doesn't increase strength. Jun Moxie looked somewhat ashamed. It doesn't increase strength? Then, Mei Shuiyan stared blankly. The effect of these pills is comparatively special. They increase the speed of Xian Qi through the meridians. Basically, the circulation speed of the Xian Qi or primary Qi in your meridians will become around 3 times faster than before. Jun Moxie explained. It basically increases the speed of one's movements. Ha! It can increase the speed of one's movements. Mei Shuiyan's eyes shone brightly. She wasn't like Jun Moxie who didn't know the value of these pills. Therefore, she was thoroughly shocked to hear this. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 502. Pleasant surprise follows after the ambiguousness. How about you take one to test them out? See the results yourself. Young Master Jun spoke up somewhat pessimistically. And that's because he had taken one pill a while ago. The speed of his Xian Qi's circulation had certainly increased when compared to before, but it didn't seem that much faster than his original speed. And that's why he was somewhat unsure and annoyed. However, young Master Jun was unaware that the art of unlocking the heaven's fortune and the Hongjun Pagoda had already transformed his meridians. And the results of the transformations they had brought about were far superior to those of these pills. These pills had certainly made some enhancements. But the results had been minimal. However, that was because his speed had already reached the pinnacle of its possibility. Therefore, he would have had to break through to the 4th level if he wanted to increase his speed substantially. However, a normal person would have witnessed immediate results if they had taken that pill instead. Mei Shuiyan looked at him in a half-believing and half-doubting manner as she took the bottle from him. She was a bit hesitant to take out a vitality linkage pill. After all, she couldn't imagine that something as heavenly and divine as these vitality linkage pills could exist. But how could a primary Qi enhancing pill compare with this one in case this divine pill was for real? What was the sole pursuit of those who trained in martial arts their entire life? Why wouldn't they wish to faster than their counterparts? Moreover, if their speed could be 3 times faster than someone who was on the same level as them, what would something like that mean to them? It would be incredible. Mei Shuiyan's fair fingers lightly fiddled with a dark green pill while her eyes gazed at it fixedly. Hazy and fascinating lights were glowing around that pill. Those lights were shining brilliantly and vibrantly. This seems like something very amazing. She gently opened her lips and took the pill. The pill hadn't even been in her mouth long enough for her to relish its taste when it suddenly melted therein. It changed into a strong flow of energy and went straight into her abdomen. Then, she felt as if the cold water which had filled her dantian had suddenly started to boil. Countless spouts of steam arose with a bang sound as a result. They then spread towards the four limbs, hundreds of bones, and all the meridians of her body at a lightning speed. Mei Shuayan was startled by this. She had finally realized that this pill was genuinely magical in its effect. She quickly calmed her breathing and congealed her aura. Then, she directed her efforts into moving that turbulent flow of steam inside her meridians in a proper manner. She sensed that her primary chi was becoming increasingly lively and fast. It then slowly surpassed the original speed. But it was still advancing in a progressive manner. Mei Shuayan's excitement was also increasing as this was happening. A long while passed. Mei Shuayan's eyes suddenly opened again. There were two flashes of electricity in her ice-cold eyes. And it seemed as if her entire body would explode with excitement. She suddenly jumped up and impatiently grabbed at Jun Moxie's hands as if her life depended on it. "Be honest with me, how many more of these pills do you have?" Her voice was urgent, and her expression was one of excitement. This heavenly beauty was usually very tranquil of nature. This was the first time that she had forgotten her manners. She had first absorbed the pill after she had ingested it. Then, she had merely given a light thought to moving her primary chi inside her body. But she had suddenly found that the primary chi inside her body had begun to soar. It had rushed with an explosive sound and had charged into each of her limbs. This meant that she could attack at a moment's thought. Moreover, she could attack with her entire strength. And this meant that she could genuinely do as she pleased, and wouldn't be forced to stop at anything. Mei Shuayan had been very surprised by such a magical feeling. This entirely omits the process of cycling one's strength in their meridians. Instead, it takes one to a level where they only have to think about using their strength. Moreover, the speed of my ability to make a move has increased to 3 times of what it was before. This tiny pill had brought about an immense qualitative change to Mei Shuayan's Xian strength. It hadn't increased her strength itself. But the growth that could have been induced by the heavenly vitality pill was nothing in comparison to the speed this vitality linkage pill had bestowed her with. Mei Shuayan could have initially been said to be the virtual image of dragon. But this analogy dictated that she had congealed into a real dragon after she had taken this pill. Let's assume that someone offered to exchange this vitality linkage pill with the one that could provide 200 years' worth of cultivation strength. It could be reckoned that she would have refused such an offer without any hesitation. After all, she could increase her strength after years of cultivation. But a qualitative change in the speed of her ability to make a move was something so astonishing that it couldn't be attained despite all efforts. This great thing stands in defiance of the laws of nature. Mei Shuayan had never anticipated that Jun Moxie would bring such a great thing for her. It had come as a very nice surprise. Jun Moxie had jumped in fright. That's because he had been alarmed by this unexpected action of the exceptionally beautiful Mei Shuayan. After all, young Master Jun had never expected that the pill he viewed as a trash could elicit such an extreme reaction from Mei Shuayan. He simply couldn't accept it for a moment. He looked at her fervent eyes. He then felt her small and soft palms grasping his hands tightly. And ecstasy nibbled at his very bones for a moment as he spoke up with a stammer. "This is a prototype, there'll be more in the future." 1, 2, 3, 4. Mei Shuayan carefully counted the remaining pills. Her eyes were shining at this moment. In fact, her whole face was shining, and her entire body seemed to be full of vigor. That's excellent. There are 4 more. You had so many. What did you say? You'll have more later on? This is very unexpected for me. This is a priceless treasure. This is amazing. The very beautiful Mei Shuayan couldn't contain her excitement. She had spoken those words incoherently, and had no control on her welling emotions at this moment. Then, the lady suddenly held Jun Moxie's face, and gave him a firm kiss. Jun Moxie spiraled into a maddening confusion. Ha! These 4 pills can get you this excited? What will happen when I give you hundreds of these? However, he was completely unaware that such amazing things hadn't even existed in the legends. The 1,000 evils and 10,000 poisons fruit was the greatest shortcut for the Tianfa forest. And that too came with immense risks. Moreover, the world outside Tianfa didn't even have the option of such risky means. Those 4 heaven-seizing divine pills had left Mei Shuayan feeling extremely pleased. After all, this meant that the fighting power of the beast kings of Tianfa would increase by 3 to 4 times. Jun Moxie felt her soft lips, and her indescribably dreamy scent. The mind of that handsome young man had been sent fluttering by that kiss. It was like he had been sent soaring to the clouds. However, his first reaction was, "Dang! I'm being assaulted indecently. This young master is being molested by this young lady. I was pushed back and tortured when I had done something like this. Was it that unbearable? Am I Jun Moxie going to suffer at the hands of this woman? Am I going to fail?" Therefore, his second reaction was, "No! I can't lose to her. I have to return to being indecent. I have to get back my advantage." Therefore, he acted without thinking, and turned his head to kiss her back. Mei Shuayan was suddenly shaken from her state of pleasant surprise. She didn't understand how to act on her own ecstasy for a moment. And she couldn't help but give Jun Moxie that kiss. But that kiss suddenly felt inappropriate. She felt an electric shock through her lips, and her face became red. It was hard to say how fast her movements were. But Jun Moxie was left to kiss empty air instead of her. In fact, he even made a shameless kissing sound while kissing empty air. However, the 2 of them were almost in each other's face at this moment. The 2 pairs of eyes weren't that far apart as they stared at each other. The atmosphere was filled with a kind of indescribable feeling. It was very awkward, it was uncertain, or maybe it was like time had stopped. The 2 of them were stupefied in that moment, thoroughly stupefied. Even time and space seemed to have become still in this moment. Jun Moxie looked at the beautiful, amazingly beautiful face of Mei Shuayan. Her big and charming eyes were looking into his. Her eyes were startled at first. Then, they became shy and embarrassed. Then, red clouds slowly started to appear on her graceful face. They then slowly spread across it, till they had even spread across to her white jade-like neck. Her rosy red lips trembled. They looked like small red cherries that were enticing him to indulge in a taste. Jun Moxie felt hot blood rush straight to his forehead. He panted as he lowered his head. The opposite party possessed tyrannical strength. However, he still covered her small lips with his own. His 2 arms moved out of instinct, and tightly held her delicate body. In fact, he had somewhat bound her very tightly in a barbaric manner while his tongue was nimbly trying to entice her. It was unclear how it happened, but his tongue eventually burst through the lips it had been besieging. Her small and nimble tongue evaded in panic. But he chased after it. In fact, he spared no effort as he pursued after the retreating enemy. Mei Shuayan had never expected him to be that bold. She had only seen Jun Moxie's eyes lose focus when he had panted heavily. It must be said that she had never experienced this before, but her instincts had predicted a crisis. And this had left her to feel uneasy. It was then that her eyes had gone dark, and her lips found themselves covered by something soft. She was about to cry out, but was stopped because a slippery tongue had dug its way inside in a nimble manner. In fact, it had gone a step further, and had started to squirm about the vicinity. This was the first time Mei Shuayan was experienced such a thing. She certainly possessed unique Xian strength and cultivation. But she was only a woman at that moment. Moreover, she was a woman who had never experienced such a feeling before. Mei Shuayan felt her mind rumble and shake in the face of this greatest of enticements. It then went blank, and she forgot to struggle. She had even forgotten her unrivaled Xian strength. And she merely stood stunned inside young Master Jun's embrace. She didn't even know how to react to any of this. Then, two big hands slipped down her waist and followed her delicate back until they boorishly grabbed her posterior. They then started kneading them in different ways. Mei Shuayan instantly snapped back from her confusion and recalled what had happened in the past. "Little guy, come home with me. I'll pet your ass every day." She instantly became back to her senses and felt shame and anger welling inside her. And the entirety of her power burst out from her body in a sudden movement. The explosion of her strength had resembled the detonation of a bomb. However, Jun Moxie was immersed in the soulfulness of the tenderness. And his mind had wandered off to thoughts that would be considered unsuitable for children. However, this was when something entirely unexpected happened. He suddenly found his feet leaving the ground, and he was sent out flying. Young Master Jun's body resembled a kite without a string as it went whooshing out of the room and fell into the far end of the courtyard. His body turned half a circle, and it seemed as if his spirit had been detached from it. He got no time to protect his body, and he fell down in a very graceful pose with his posterior lowered like that of a swan. He had felt an endless tenderness a moment ago. However, he felt as if his posterior had blossomed into a flower the next moment. This huge contrast made Jun Moxie extremely dissatisfied. But he hadn't even had enough time to stand up when he suddenly remembered what had just happened. And his whole body was instantly drenched in cold sweat as a result of this realization. Crap! This one mistake will cause me everlasting sorrow. How could I have been this rude? How did I lose my mind into offending a person one simply shouldn't? My life is done for. Her strength is at par with the unreasonable venerable Mei's. Moreover, she's that stubborn and unreasonable venerable Mei's sister. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 503. Huang Ancestor moves into action. She assaulted me. She thinks she's too strong. She assaulted me before. And she's assaulted me again. But she gets tyrannical when I tried to get back. She's got no sense of justice. Oh heavens! Oh Mother Earth! How is this happening? There was a loud explosion when he was whining inside. Mei Shuayan's reddened face was brimming with anger. Mei Shuayan had been very embarrassment on the account of the 3 incidents, especially this third one. Consequently, her anger had rushed out like a powerful tornado. In fact, it had rushed out like a violent tornado. How? I say, you. Why did you assault me in such an indecent manner? Jun Moxie tried to gain the upper hand by striking first with that question. I assaulted you? Mei Shuiyan's face turned dark as she raised her hand with the intention of moving into action. What is this? You're a grown man and I'm a woman. And I assaulted you? Where does this even come from? Don't you feel any shame in saying this? Jun Moxie turned his body. But his posterior was still on the ground since he hadn't stood up yet. Then, the young master gave a salivating grin. I didn't do it on purpose. I admit that I made a mistake. Me, want to take responsibility? I want to take responsibility for it. You, feck off. Mei Shuiyan found it ridiculous. And also felt ashamed. Her face had become hot. She wanted to beat him up ferociously. But her heart softened for some unknown reason when she saw him in his incomparably mischievous form. Consequently, she didn't move to attack him. Instead, she merely stomped her foot and snarled at him. Jun Moxie seemed to be begging for a pardon. So, he didn't dare to say much. He stood up after rolling and crawling. Then, the young master escaped whilst cowering like a rat. And disappeared without a trace. I've finally escaped. Good heavens. But why didn't she hit me for what I did? Has she also fallen for this young master? Mei Shuiyan stamped her feet and covered her face. How did that happen? What's the matter with me? Why did I let him escape? This isn't like my usual self. Elder sister, what happened to you? Did that brat provoke you again? The Snake King rushed over fast with a whooshing sound. Then, she suddenly cried out right after she had finished speaking. Ah! Elder sister, what happened to you? That was because the Snake King had discovered her elder sister blushing like a young girl who was deeply in love with a man. In fact, her elder sister had covered her reddened face and was stamping her feet. She didn't even know how to act properly in this moment. And the Snake King had been left petrified by this. Good heavens! How many years have we been sisters for? Have I ever seen elder sister behave like this? Don't tell me, did that brat molest elder sister? Has his guts grown so big? No one in the entire Tianfa forest would ever dare to do such a thing. I can't even dare to think about such a thing. This is utterly unbelievable, isn't it? There was a whoosh sound at this moment. Mei Shuiyan didn't say a word. She merely covered her face and escaped into her room. It seemed as if she felt like dying. Then, Han came over to inquire about what had happened. But she only saw Green Hunter standing gaping and speechless in the courtyard with a strange expression on her face. Therefore, young Lady Han couldn't help but ask out of concern, what happened? What happened to Sister Mei? Nothing, it's nothing. It's nothing. The Snake King replied somewhat hastily. It was a long while before she was able to recover from her shock. She then spoke up in a somewhat involuntary manner. It's nothing at all. She then stamped her foot and continued. Dang! I'll go see elder sister. Then she also ran into that room. She hadn't forgotten the relationship between Han and Jun Moxie. So, how could she dare to talk drivel at this time? Moreover, she had only conjectured matters at this point. But she wasn't certain. Could that Jun Moxie have such guts? But elder sister's behavior was very strange this time. Moreover, those sounds indicated that. No, That's out of question. I have to confirm this first. How can we allow that humongous debauchee of a brat to get away with this if that's the case? Guan Qinghan raised her frowned eyebrows. Her stomach was full of suspicions at this moment. What happened here? Why does the atmosphere seem so awkward? She had seen neither Mei Shuayan nor Jun Moxie since she had come out late. But she had still heard some sounds. She had particularly heard Mei Shuayan's loud and angry "feck off." In fact, it would have been strange if she hadn't heard it. It seems that Moxie has somehow offended her. I'll have a talk with Moxie tomorrow. There are guests. And it's important that we treat our guests well. Guan Qinghan frowned and returned to her room. That Moxie's character is too violent. Too violent. Some change needs to be brought therein. It wasn't long before the dead bodies were cleaned away by the guards along with any traces of what had happened. Therefore, the scene of this incident had again turned into a peaceful picture. That was so nice. It was so fragrant. That was very soft, it was insanely soft, very pleasurable. Jun Moxie pondered on the feeling he had just relished as he rushed towards the aristocratic hall, even though the encounter had been a very dangerous one. But Jun Moxie thought it was worth it. Totally worth it. It felt so great. Forget about everything else, that mouth was very sweet. It was even sweeter than the sweetest honey on earth. It was too good. Even the aftertaste of it feels so good. Moreover, the satiny and warm touches of that tongue. That incredibly soft and indescribable feeling. It was indescribable. I can't even write that beautiful feeling down. It was the best. Young Master Jun Moxie continued to stare blankly like a lost person as he moved on the road in an infatuated manner. His very soul was shaking. In fact, he had basically sleepwalked to the aristocratic hall. It was fortunate that nobody was waiting to ambush him there. Otherwise, it would have been very easy to kill Jun Moxie while he was en route. After all, this had been the hitman Jun's moment of least vigilance over the course of both of his lives. In fact, it could even be said that he wasn't vigilant at all. The young master had already made a determined vow during that time on that road. I take this vow no matter what, no matter how, no matter by which means, this one. I want to. I will, absolutely. I really want to make her my wife. It doesn't matter what her identity is. It doesn't matter how great her Xian strength is. It doesn't matter what her. I will make her my wife. I don't have a concrete reason. And I don't need a concrete reason. Moreover, she can't even say no to me. I'll even blackmail her every chance I get. I don't care how shameless it gets. It could be said that he had despised the backwardness of the feudal system of this world in the past. But it suddenly seemed very attractive to him. After all, taking 3 or 4 wives or concubines was a very normal thing to do for the men of this world, especially the young masters of the affluent families. In fact, it was like it was their birthright. However, Jun Moxie suddenly bumped into a serious problem as he pondered on this matter throughout his journey. And it was a serious issue at that. Or a very logical issue, to be more accurate. He was closely associated with various women. But Dugu Xiaoyi was unruly and headstrong. Moreover, she was too young. So, she didn't know much about things. This meant that she wasn't fit to be the senior-most wife of his household. And Guan Qinghan was too cold and aloof. So, even she wasn't best suited to head the harem. But Mei Shuayan was an extremely beautiful woman who possessed ultimate talent. Moreover, she was also peerlessly capable. This obviously meant that she was the best pick for the senior-most wife. Okay. It's you. Do you think of running away, my beauty? You'll be my lovely wife. Jun Moxie made a snapping sound with his fingers as he fluttered into the aristocratic hall. However, the worries of his heart eased down when saw Tang Yuan stuffing himself with food. The young master then asked a few brisk questions that concerned his plans. But the young master neglected everything and fled soon after, since the teary-eyed Tang Yuan had lifted his robe to show the areas of his body that had been mistreated. What's the difference between looking at that and a fat lard of pork? Moreover, this is a living lard of pork. That is too nauseating. However, Fatty Tang felt that he had been entrapped into suffering the most bitter of hardships. And Jun Moxie was the one behind all of it. Therefore, Fatty had wanted to go over the entire matter so that he could complain to him with tears of blood. Fatty had obviously planned on obtaining the greatest of benefits from that. In fact, he had hoped to get at least a few million beautiful silver taels for his ordeal. But how could he have expected that young Master Jun would disappear before he had even finished with setting up the base for it? He had merely left with a few hateful words. Fatty, I had somehow gotten into a good frame of mind today, but your fat belly has ruined it. So, I'm going to take away 10% from your profits over this month. Fatty was stunned at first. He then gently caressed his huge and drooping belly in silence for a while. Is my belly that formidable? Then, he suddenly thought of something, and screamed as miserably as a dying pig. I'm a victim here. And you still want to take away my share of the profits. Where's the justice in that? I deserve a minimum of 100,000 in silver for what I've been through. Oh heavens! Oh Mother Earth! Kill me! The experts of the illusory ocean of blood had been sleeping peacefully at the residence of the Golden East City's Huang family. They believed that sending only 1 out of the 8 of them was more than enough for such trivial tasks. What would they possibly think of dispatching 2 people? It was like going for overkill in their opinion. Success was 10,000% guaranteed. It's a pity that nothing is certain in the world. There would always be 1 or 2 faults even if things seemed somewhat certain. After all, nothing was ever absolutely certain. Everyone was prepared to hear the good news when they woke up. But they inquired, and were told that their 2 people hadn't returned. They hadn't returned over the course of the night. This was clearly unexpected. But no one paid it too much mind to it. Maybe the bone-tempering pills were stored far off. So, retrieving them could have taken some time perhaps. After all, those 2 men are true great master-level experts. Anyway, they would be able to escape even if they ran into an enemy they couldn't beat. Wouldn't they? Those 2 should be able to escape and return without any issues even if their strength fell short. As for the prospect of them not being able to escape, is that even possible? Who in the regular society would possess such strength? That is a ridiculous question. Therefore, no one worried. They waited till afternoon. But those 2 still didn't return. In fact, it was like they had vanished. It was as if those 2 had melted into the air. And this finally sent everyone into somewhat of a panic. Things don't look very encouraging. Senior Huang, the young lord of the illusory ocean of blood, Huyan Xiao, frowned as he tapped his fingers on the table beside him. It doesn't make sense that the old 5th and old 6th haven't returned as of yet. We've waited this long, and they still haven't returned. I'm afraid that they might have run into an unavoidable and terrible mishap. Does this mean that the aristocratic hall truly has some great power behind it? Is it possible that even the experts from my illusory ocean of blood are no match for this power? The Huang ancestor frowned. His white eyebrows somewhat trembled on his gloomy face. He then spoke up after a long while. We're very clear about the aristocratic Hull's strength. They only have one disciple of Hong Meng Chen, and some guy who is a winemaker. And both of these men are only at the Sky Xian level. So, there's nothing to worry about when it comes to these two insignificant Sky Xian experts. Moreover, there's no one else there apart from these two people. No one of extremely great capabilities. There's a possibility that the two of our men might have run into a much more powerful enemy. But it couldn't have been at the aristocratic Hull. Could such a power belong to those three families? Huang Xiao frowned. No. Tianxiang Empire's might is the greatest amongst the nations of the continent. And it also has the highest number of Xian experts. But it's hard to find even a few spirit Xian experts throughout the empire. So there's little to no scope of a stronger existence. Senior Huang frowned since he was in a gloomy mood. Then, a malicious light flashed in his eyes as he spoke up in a hateful tone. Such a powerful existence has to be from the Jun family, that is if one even exists in the first place. In fact, only the Jun family can have such a powerhouse. The Jun family. Can a family that was nearly oppressed to extinction by the Silver Blizzard City have such a powerhouse inside it? Isn't that extremely outrageous? Huang Xiao didn't seem to be in agreement. The young lord mustn't forget that we had received news some time ago. A black-clothed and masked expert had appeared at the Southern Heaven City. He was even said to be unrivaled throughout the world. I don't believe this man to be an unrivaled powerhouse, but he was at least as strong as Yunbi Chen. Old 5th and Old 6th possess great master-level cultivation. But they were trained behind closed doors. And the difference between them and someone who has reached that level by gaining experience whilst fighting in the regular society isn't small. Therefore, they don't have enough combat experience to fight such an enemy if they were to fall into a trap upon being caught off guard. In fact, it is quite possible that they could have suffered serious losses in such a case. The Huang ancestor murmured in a low voice. It seems that I may have underestimated him. What do you think should we plan to do if the Jun family genuinely has such a strong expert behind them? Huang Xiao asked as he frowned deeply. Those bone-tempering pills are probably being refined by that mysterious expert. And that's the most important aspect in this matter. In fact, Father had urged me that we should do everything we can to make such an individual, if one exists in the first place, join us at the illusory ocean of blood. Moreover, he said that we must get along with this man even if we can't make him join us. That's because he won't be hostile to us that way. And this would mean that the experts from the elusive world of immortals and Great Golden City won't be able to take advantage of that. So, won't our plans fail if we get into a conflict with him? Huang Xiao felt his head ache as he spoke. Our illusory ocean of blood can't suffer in this instance, regardless of what kind of an expert that man is. The Huang ancestor flashed an evil smile as he continued slowly. We'll wait till midnight. And I'll personally move out if those two still don't return. I'll go to the Jun family and take a look at what kind of a tiger's lair it is in reality. Let's see what kind of an expert is hiding there. Is he genuinely unrivaled in this world? Is he genuinely worth his name? Hee hee. You must be extremely careful, Senior Huang. You mustn't kill that man if you run into him. After all, we need those bone-tempering pills. Huang Xiao hastily spoke up. He wasn't worried about the Huang ancestor facing some mishap. After all, the Huang ancestor's strength was considered amongst the top 10 inside the illusory ocean of blood. And This meant that he could humbly be called genuinely unrivaled in the regular society. This old man will obviously behave himself. But the situation has already become hostile now. I won't let the others take advantage of the situation if I can't recruit him for our use. He'll obey me and prosper. Or he'll oppose me and die. The Huang ancestor's glare became dark. Then, an ominous glint flashed in his eyes as he snorted. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 504. The days of escaping for their life. The Tianxiang city stood tall in the dark of the night. In fact, the city seemed like a huge giant which had been standing there since antiquity. Two figures were staggering forth from a distance. They eventually saw the pitch-black outline of the city, and breathed a sigh of relief. Then, they relaxed and fell to the ground. These two people were the same ones who had escaped that bloody fight earlier, Mu Shuatong and Han Yenmeng. They had fled far via many remote areas. And they had suffered a lot during this time, and had been left thoroughly exhausted as a result. The last 1 month had been particularly tough. And that's because they had been repeatedly ambushed and hindered by experts of the Xiao family. Consequently, these two had constantly been fleeing in a state of panic and terror. Mu Shuatong was somewhat better. After all, he was at the Sky Xian level, and had traveled far and wide in the society. Therefore, he was able to endure for longer periods of time. But the Silver City's Princess Han Yenmeng was in a miserable state. It must be mentioned that this little girl was the divinely pampered little princess of the Silver Blizzard City. She had always had an easy life. She had never suffered through such a bumpy journey. Moreover, she had constantly been in danger of being ambushed and brutally slaughtered this entire time. Plus, she was merely at the insignificant Gold Xian level. So, it could be reckoned that she would have died countless times by now if Mu Shuatong hadn't been at her side. They had arrived at Tianxiang City by pure luck. It was mostly thanks to the extensive experience Mu Shuatong had gained whilst traveling through the world in the past. They had changed their appearance and route countless times. In fact, things had gotten to a point that they had to make a bumblebee sting the little princess's beautiful face to ensure a better disguise. They obviously had to repeat this bumblebee stingy trick whenever the induced swelling started to recede. The two had also been using a special liquid on their faces to tan their skin dark and glossy. And these methods had somehow helped them in crossing the mountain passes. The two had also kept sound-altering pills in their mouths throughout the journey. They had never taken them out. In fact, they wouldn't dare take them out even when they had confirmed that they were alone and safe. They were so afraid of being caught by their enemy that they had gotten habitual of these things. They had been extremely cautious the entire journey. However, they had still left many tiny and unintentional clues along the way, and had been almost discovered as a result. They had been attacked by many enemies at one instance. But they were fortunate that they were far away from the Silver City at that time. After all, this was the reason why they hadn't encountered too many experts at that time. Mu Shuatong had fought with everything he had, and had managed to kill them in order to make their escape. However, that instance had also exposed the hidden trails of their escape route. Consequently, the Xiao family's experts had soon blocked off the roads leading to the Tianxiang city. The two didn't know how long they had been wandering for. However, they had finally arrived near their destination. And they knew that there was at least one individual in this city who would protect the two of them. Therefore, they breathed a sigh of relief as they loosened up. But Mu Shuatong still hadn't forgotten that the magnificent Jewel Hall was also located inside the Tianxiang city. it could be reckoned that the venue might have some members of the Xiao family. In fact, there was a possibility that the Xiao family might have gained complete control over it. And this meant that they couldn't dare to be careless by means. In fact, it seemed that the final moments leading to safety were also going to be the ones of the maximum danger. They couldn't relax until they had met with Jun Xie or Jun Moxie. After all, any lax or careless on their part could consign them to eternal damnation. In fact, their carelessness could even foreordain the entire Silver City to doom. The Xiao family had been preparing for this revolt for many years in secret. Therefore, their secret strength had become considerably overbearing. Mu Shuatong felt extremely sorrowful as the thought of it crossed his mind. The Han family had always trained their children to exercise the utmost tolerance towards the members of the Xiao family. In fact, they tried to be empathetic and tried to help them in every possible way. And that's what helped in increasing the Xiao family's strength. The Xiao was also an industrious and conscientious force. They always took care of matters and shouldered every responsibility with determination. They were truly ironclad allies of the Han family. But now, Mu Shuatong smiled bitterly. The Silver Blizzard City was a colossal force. But the truth would remain hidden from everyone since the Xiao family was possibly in control. Even the ruling Han family of the Silver City had been turned blind and deaf to everything. The Silver City had secret contacts in every major city of the vast continent. And this meant that any node of this vast network could be used to send information to the Silver City. But he couldn't dare to use them. And that's because the backbone this information network was controlled by the Xiao family. The Xiao family was controlling everything that was outside the Silver Blizzard City. Consequently, this massive information network had become a hindrance to his mission. It was needless to say that he wouldn't get any help. Moreover, he was also worried about his location being betrayed. After all, he was shouldering the responsibility that pertained to the very rise or fall of the Silver City. And this meant that he couldn't dare to show any carelessness or recklessness. Mu Shuatong controlled his breathing as he slowly stood up with difficulty. He took out 2 packets of millet from his chest pocket. He handed one to Han Yen Meng as he spoke up in a warm tone. "Little Meng, eat this and recover your strength. We'll go the city in order to try and find Jun Xie or Jun Moxie in some time." Han Yen Meng's face had become dark and glossy due to the application of that substance. But one look at her previously beautiful face was enough to tell that she had lost a lot of weight over the course of that journey. In fact, she had become shriveled. The course of this escape had taught this naive and adorable young girl the true meaning of the word viciousness. She had never even dreamed that the elders who always acted so genially towards her would be perpetrating such contemptible acts in secret. They didn't stint at anything in order to get her killed. Consequently, the little girl had been left to feel as if her whole worldview had been toppled in an instant. The physical toll and the heavy physiological strain of this journey had made it difficult for her to breathe. She appeared nearly stupefied as she took the packet from Mu Shuatong. The little girl brought the millet to her mouth and took a bite. She then chewed it painfully. The sour taste of it started to make her sick at heart, and she couldn't help her tears from flowing out. Mu Shuatong sighed and looked at her with pity. "She's a pampered princess of the Silver City. This little one has been loved and pampered by thousands of people. How can she endure such suffering? That Xiao family is the one to blame for all of this. That donghua rebel family. You must finish it, even if it's hard to eat and digest. You must eat this unpalatable thing so that you have enough strength to press on." They ate their dry rations and rested for a short period. They then felt that a portion of their strength had restored. Well, they could at least hasten at a normal pace now. So, the both of them slowly stood up. However, a complicated feeling arose in their hearts when they looked at the Tianxiang city in the distance. Who would have thought that the very future of the Silver Blizzard City would have rested on the Jun family one day? The same Jun family which was once brought to devastation by that very Silver Blizzard City. Isn't this too ridiculous? Mu Shuatong would have found it laughable if it had been mentioned at some instance in the past. But that situation had become fact nowadays. This was the only straw these two people could grasp at in order to save their lives at this time. Let's go. There was a whooshing sound as they forced themselves to rise. Then, their silhouettes flashed, and they disappeared into the night. It was nearly midnight. Mei Shuayan sat in front of the dusky lamplight with her chin rested on her hands. She nearly seemed unconscious as the lamp's light flickered in her spellbound eyes. The powerful Venerable Mei had been commanding the lands with her supreme authority for God knows how many years. So, one could well imagine her bearings. However, she had never experienced this feeling of palpitating with fear before. That sudden kiss from Jun Moxie had fallen like a stone in the calm and still lake of her heart. And it had suddenly given rise great waves in her still lake-like tranquil mind. In fact, the ripples that had started from the spot where that small stone had fallen had moved outwards by now. Moreover, they were showing no signs of stopping. Snake King had been very concerned. So, she had asked her a few questions about the matter. But Mei Shuayan had refused to acknowledge her. In fact, her expression had become quite unsightly. That had scared Green Hunter. Therefore, the Snake King had escaped like a wisp of smoke, and had gone to talk to Guan Qing Han instead. That look on elder sister's face is enough to induce the pressure necessary to kill a person. I'll be done for if she gets mad at me. After all, the pretty dogs end up being endangered when one kind find an ugly one for their meal. Ah, what kind of an analogy am I using? Anyway, staying here is certainly not as much fun as listening to Guan Qing Han talk about the scandalous ways in which Jun Moxie used to behave. Just imagining this guy's past behavior is extremely laughable. It is certainly very enjoyable. Jun Moxie continued to strive and suffer as he refined the pills. His skills must have improved since he didn't fail so many times this time around. He had successfully refined a bunch of pills inside the furnace. Afterwards, he sent out his spirit sense around the Jun residence while remaining hidden inside the Hongjun pagoda. And his spirit sense covered the entirety of the massive residence. Those two experts from the illusory ocean of blood disappeared from my house last night. So, their follow-up operation should happen tonight. Therefore, Jun Moxie couldn't be careless by any means. After all, those people from the illusory ocean of blood may not have been much in Mei Shuayan's eyes. But they were still genuine great master-level experts at the end of the day. And Jun Moxie knew in his heart that he wouldn't have been able to deal with those two black-clothed masked men if it hadn't been for Mei Shuayan's actions. He had refined 6 more of those pills that night. Jun Moxie had finally learned of the ferocity of these pills. Therefore, he obviously didn't intend on satisfying the Tian Fa forest's needs first. After all, that would be akin to concentrating on the details while ignoring the fundamentals. One of these 6 pills was intended for his grandfather. 1 each was meant for Jun Wuyi, Solitary Falcon, Hai Chenfeng, and Song Shang. And Bailey Luo Yun would also get 1 of these pills if he were able to complete his assigned goals within the agreed time period. Most of these individuals hadn't reached the Spirit Xian level. And this level of strength was a minimum requirement when it came to the consumption of those pills. But Jun Moxie was confident that they could be advanced to that level in a short period of time. We can only look down at the world with arrogance if our side strength truly advances. It could be said that Jun Moxie was brimming with confidence since he had these 3 pills now. He had only refined one of them till now. But Jun Moxie was confident that refining the other 2 wasn't that far off. That was because Jun Moxie could clearly feel his progress. In fact, he could faintly sense that he had reached the peak of the sky Xian level. Moreover, he felt that the spirit Xian realm was only a step away. This increase in his strength also represented that his ability to refine these pills would enhance substantially. The 2 children could still be seen immersed in their training below. The 2 mute kids were practicing the sword style he had shown them, even in the darkness of the night. In fact, the 2 kids never seemed to get exhausted. It was unknown how much sweat they had been pouring out of their bodies every day. Jun Moxie sighed in the secrecy of his heart. The hard work of those 2 kids could shock anyone. But their innate aptitude was far too inferior. They had taken the 10 years pills only a short while ago. But their current strength was still too low to give them the bone-tempering pills. Moreover, they couldn't speak or write. So, it was very difficult to communicate with them. They can't speak? Jun Moxie's eyes flashed as he remembered something special. It was a very unique ventriloquism skill. Learning this may take some time. But won't the problem be solved with ease if I can pass on this skill to these 2? And this would be particularly useful with these 2 kids since they can't speak at all. In fact, I believe that these 2 kids will be able to make some sounds once I've taught them the basics of this technique. And all the problems will cease to exist once that has happened. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 505. Huang Taiyang. Yi Guhan sat cross-legged at a distance from the 2 children. His face was expressionless, and body motionless. However, his mind was swirling in the thoughts of his sword techniques. He hadn't done anything else in the past few days. He had only contemplated and practiced his sword techniques. He had taken these 2 little children as his role models. And he had started creating and practicing a single-armed sword technique. He had decided to use this opportunity to live again for the sole purpose of creating his original sword technique. The solitary Falcon hadn't had any sleep either. He was in Grandfather Jun's study room with Jun Moxie. It was unknown what they were discussing at this time. Everything seemed quite peaceful. Everything seemed auspicious. Jun Moxie was smiling in great comfort. Suddenly, the loud sound of an earth-shattering gust of wind arose from the distant horizon. This was accompanied by an exceptionally powerful and lively aura. Moreover, this terrifying aura was moving towards his side in an unbridled fashion. However, this aura also contained a boundless tinge of anger and murderous intention in it. This mannerism and aura was so imposing and powerful that it seemed as if it would swallow the sky and shake the earth. It was incomparably ferocious. Jun Moxie could think of only one person who could be equally or more powerful. And that individual was Venerable Mei, the Lord of Tian Fa Forest. It could be said that even the 2 world-shaking swordsmen from the elusive world of Immortals Rainstorm and Hurricane Great Masters weren't at par with this individual. This kind of strength had evidently reached the pinnacle of human accomplishments. Jun Moxie's pupil contracted. He has arrived at last. This will be a great showdown. I'm sure the person approaching is Huang family's old ancestor. He was able to ascertain the identity of this individual by taking the malice and anger in that aura into account. It is utterly unrestrained. It's so blatant. This person's abilities are truly unmatched in this world. Jun Moxie sneered inside. But the young master had spread his net. Would I be catching some big fish tonight itself? Solitary Falcon and the other two were shaken inside the study. They then abruptly raised their heads. The Snake King was inside her room. Her face was also filled with shock. She then quickly rushed out. Mei Shuayan also frowned as her eyes flashed with resentment. But she remained seated still and upright. There was a violent lightning the next moment as a figure appeared on top of the tallest tower of the Jun family's residence. He was dressed in glamorous purple gown. His hair was white, and he was tall and sturdy in stature. The golden embroidery on the edges of his gown glittered in the moonlight. And this made his image bright and somewhat hazy. He was standing with his hands behind his back, and hadn't uttered a single word until now. But the imposing mannerism that was surging from his body had already informed everyone of his arrival. Someone of his status wouldn't speak up on his own initiative at the Jun family's residence. So he waited for someone to come out and talk first. However, this exceptional expert hadn't realized that his feet had landed upon the top of Jun Moxie's Huang Pagoda when he had touched down on the top of the Jun residence's tower. Jun Moxie was hiding inside the pagoda at this time. Consequently, this individual had ended up cramming young Master Jun. This had obviously left Jun Moxie to feel very gloomy. May I dare to ask the identity of this very able person who has graced my Jun family's home this late at night? This old man is Jun Xie. Excuse me for not coming out to receive you. An exceptionally deep and steady voice resounded. The person speaking was naturally Jun Xie. Old man Jun had already determined that no one in the Jun family could rival this newcomer. But his voice was still calm, and had no hint of fear. Jun Xie hadn't faced off against many such experts. But he had still come across many unexpected events in his long life's worth of combat experience. In fact, he was a man capable of retaining his composure even in the face of a landslide. It must be mentioned that even great master-level individuals could rarely reach this level. Jun Xie? Haha. You're not worthy of talking to this old man, the man on top of the tower laughed madly. The man who was daring enough to deal with my illusory ocean of blood's guards last night must come stand in front of me this instance. You don't want to annoy this old man. A sneer echoed at this time. It was accompanied by a cold voice. Illusory of ocean of blood? That's a fancy name. Are you implying that others can't even detain a thief if the said thief is associated with the illusory ocean of blood? A slim, tall, and shadowy silhouette slowly walked forth along with the echo of that sneer. His long hair fluttered in the wind. It seemed as if his eyes were filled with thunder. He stood tall like a mountain with his hand behind his back. It was the solitary falcon. Solitary Falcon's nature had always been like that of an untamed steed. He had always lived on his own terms. He had genuinely despised those who used power to bully others, particularly if they acted like pretentious pricks afterwards. So, how could he not get angry and reply in an arrogant tone when he saw this person speaking loudly with extreme arrogance? Solitary Falcon had vaguely heard about what had happened the night before. So, he felt that he had missed a great opportunity. But this new character had appeared at this time. The solitary Falcon knew that he may not be a match for this person. But he still wanted to try him out in combat. Anyway, it must be said that the solitary Falcon had been left rather confused and speechless upon witnessing that old man's false big talk and loud roars. Are the three holy lands that amazing? This man's arrogance is probably unrivaled in the world. I don't even want to give a dang about you. Who are you? The Huang ancestor looked at him arrogantly. Tell me your name first. Let me confirm if you're even worthy of dying at my hands. This old man never kills unnamed small fries. I'm Solitary Falcon. Is that enough to qualify? Solitary Falcon raised his head and looked at that old man with disdain. This old fart is like a theater actor. What, worthy of die at my hands, and this old man never kills unnamed small fires. These are the dramatic lines of a theater actor. It has to be said that the grand names of these three holy lands have gotten to the heads of these people. It's fine if you want to have a good fight. But why are you flinging these lines around? Do you think that you're a heroine in a drama or something? Solitary Falcon? Haha. It may be assumed that you're the new 8th Great Master, right? I've heard of you. The old man raised his white eyebrows and roared. But I've barely heard of you. That's about it. You still don't have enough strength to be selected into our illusory ocean of blood. Yet, you still dare to make so much noise in front of this old man by relying on that meager strength? You're still not worthy of fighting with this old man. I'd like to find out about that by crossing hands with you. Anyway, you've come here so brazenly. So, I'm assuming that you don't intend to hide your identity. I don't even know what position you hold in the illusory ocean of blood. How will I be able to distinguish you unless I know your name? Solitary Falcon snorted as he asked. I'll tell you my name, youngster. But you stand firm afterwards. You mustn't let this old man's name intimidate or demoralize you. The Huang ancestor laughed as he faced upwards at first. Then, he glared at the Solitary Falcon and said, This old man is the sun which scorches 1,000 mountains. Huang Tai Yang. Pfft, a snigger passed in the empty air. It turned out that the hiding Jun Moxie couldn't help but snigger. This old man's name is amazing. He's actually called Huang Tai Yang, as in the extremely **nographic man. And his nickname is even interesting. After all, his nickname can easily be understood as exploits 1,000 mountains. This is a pitch-perfect match. I think it's impossible to laugh at this man. But hearing that unreconcilable name had left Jun Moxie to ascertain that this old man was that relative of the Huang family. Jun Moxie had indeed found it very ridiculous. But Solitary Falcon didn't feel the same. It was because this funny-sounding sun which scorches 1,000 mountain, Huang Tai Yang, was a massive legend from 130 years ago. He was born with average talents. And had nothing exceptional about him. He was considered a good talent in the Huang family. But even they didn't consider him to be very great. But his strength suddenly increased one day, and he reached the spirit Xian level very abruptly as a result. He then traveled the world in search for opponents. He had been very fierce in those times. And it was unknown how many experts had died at his hand. Legend had it that his Xian strength was endless. It had continued to increase at a shocking speed. He had gone from being at the Earth Xian level to the breaking through to the Great Master level at very quick pace. In fact, it had only taken him a few years to become the top expert in the world once he had broken through the Spirit Xian level. Consequently, he had become a great legend in those days. He had particularly become a gigantic legend in the Xian community. Rumor even had it that he had once faced 2 Xian beast kings alone. Moreover, he hadn't fallen into a disadvantageous position in that encounter. The progress of his Xian strength had become the biggest mystery of the world in those days. What kind of power can make an Earth Xian expert suddenly break through to the Spirit Xian level? And the Great Master level after that? Moreover, in a few years' time at that? This had led people to try even harder to find out about his origins. The families of his slain enemies and many other Xian experts were enough in count to fill the sky. In fact, many of them had united to take revenge. But he had killed all of them with ease by using his own strength alone. That had continued until Huang Taiyang suddenly disappeared. Consequently, his bloody legend also came to an end. The so-called legend had vanished from the world. But it turned out that he had been absorbed by the illusory ocean of blood in reality. His disappearance had led his enemies to suppress the Huang family in order to make him reappear. The Huang family's members knew that he had joined the illusory ocean of blood. However, he never reconnected with them. And they have enough qualifications to contact the illusory ocean of blood. So, they lost all forms of contact with him. The Huang family had lost their most powerful supporter. Therefore, they had no option but to endure being suppressed in helplessness. And they continued to get repressed in utter helplessness until they were reduced to a regular Xian family. This was especially true for the years of late. In fact, they would have become a sunken ship if it wasn't for the Dugu family's patronage. It was a very curious coincidence that this legendary heavens-shaking ancestor of the Huang family had arrived just when Jun Moxie and Tang Yuan were messing with them. So, it's the old Huang Sr. Should I presume that the old Huang Sr. has arrived here in order to re-establish this might? Solitary Falcon was stunned since he knew who Huang Taiyang was. But his tongue was still working as harshly as before. To establish might. And this old man doesn't mind killing a few people. Huang Taiyang looked at him with disdain as he adopted a chilling smile. His voice reverberated like that of an owl. For example, some people who have relied on their undeserved reputation to become the 8th great master by sheer luck. Or maybe even the worthlessly lowest-ranked great master who thinks that he's better than me, the greatest in the world. Solitary Falcon instantly became enraged. A sharp light flashed in his eyes. Huang Taiyang, I've called you, senior, to give you respect. But don't go on bullying the others because of your rotten reputation from the past. You've become very outdated since you had disappeared from the wider society long back. But this world isn't the one you were once familiar with. In fact, you need to start worrying about that long-expired legend of yours. After all, you wouldn't want your 200 years old reputation to be destroyed by me, would you? The Huang ancestor laughed. He seemed overjoyed, as if he had heard an extremely funny joke. His body even swayed from the laughing. Suddenly, a cold and indifferent voice resonated in an impatient manner. Where did this old crow come from? And what are you croaking so late at night for? You've disturbed my deep dreams. This voice wasn't very loud, but it had nevertheless echoed like loud thunder. Moreover, it had cut through Huang Taiyang's great master-level field of aura with ease. It seemed as if a sharp sword had suddenly descended to the earth from the heavens in the dark of this murky and lazy night. Each word had sounded as if the god of thunder was giving vent to his anger. It had sounded like the slow and muffled beating of drums in the 9th heaven. But everyone who had heard it was left to shake to their very cores. Each word had induced a tremor. A pounding tremor. In fact, it seemed as if each word had drummed at people's cores like a mallet. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 506. The fatal combination of the falcon and the snake. Who is this? Can I ask which of the other 2 Holy Lands people have come here? I request that you show yourself to prevent a misunderstanding from affecting our friendship. The Huang ancestor had a very cautious look on his face. That one sentence had been enough for him to assess that this person was a veteran. Those words had been simple, but he had realized that this person was extremely strong. In fact, he had even disregarded the insult concealed in this individual's words because of this reason, and had asked this question instead of retaliating. Even the tone of his voice had changed. And that's because he had quickly judged that this newcomer's strength was extremely high. It must be mentioned that those words of insult were nothing more than a trivial matter when it came to the assurance of his safety in front of such danger. Huang Taiyang was a man who possessed hundreds of years' worth of experience. So, how could he not understand that truth? The Jun family has such an expert. And listening to his voice leaves to judge that his strength may not be weaker than mine. Huang Taiyang was extremely shocked at this moment. It seems that I've underestimated the Jun family. This extremely strong expert and that great master solitary Falcon can become a huge threat to me if they join hands. In fact, they can even pose a mortal threat to me. Huang Taiyang had arrived at the Jun family with the intention of blackmailing them for the bone-tempering pills. However, the thought had quickly dispelled from his mind. In fact, he had even started looking around for an escape route. And that was because his sharp perception ability had made him realize that he may have walked into a great danger. He felt as if one false move could ruin everything. In fact, it could also result in his funeral. His many hundreds of years of experience in the wider society had tempered his instincts. And the Huang ancestor had always trusted in his instincts. There was a light rustling sound as a green-clad girl appeared beside solitary Falcon. She looked at Huang Taiyang in a cold manner and spoke. "It's me." Mei Shuayan was the one who had spoken those words of insult in the beginning. But the person who had appeared in the open was the Snake King. Huang Taiyang's eyes opened wide as he stared at her. He had thought that the person who had spoken out would be a great master-level expert. He had expected this individual to be old in terms of age, like he himself was. In fact, he had imagined an old lady with wrinkled skin and a hunched back. But he had never expected that this individual would turn out to be such a beautiful young girl. He couldn't help but ask in stupefaction, "That was you?" This was the first time the Snake King and the solitary Falcon were meeting after they had arrived at the Jun residence. It must be mentioned that their first meeting hadn't been on cordial grounds. Therefore, the solitary Falcon had stared at her wide-eyed when he had first seen her appear at his side. His reaction would have been rather extreme if it hadn't been for his strong ability to control. In fact, he would have nearly cried out in surprise. However, he had restrained himself with great difficulty. But the colors of surprise had still filled his eyes. How has the king of poisons, the greatest of all the snake beasts, appeared here so suddenly? What are you staring at, Falcon? So, you find it shocking that I've appeared here? The Snake King snorted as she gave him a look of displeasure. The issue is, how did you show up here? Solitary Falcon was stumped. He stammered as if his mind had short-circuited. Shouldn't she have followed her senior back into the Tianfa forest? So, how did she suddenly show up at the Jun residence? Isn't this place too far north from her southern territory? I followed you to here, he. The Snake King chuckled. Oh. So, that's what happened. He looked at the Snake King, and traces of wonder filled his eyes. He then thought about when Jun Moxie had gone missing for 2 days at the southern Heaven City. Is it possible that he had gone to the Tianfa forest, and had ended up charming the Snake King in that time? He's indeed a vigorous man. Could he be called a vigorous man? No. Even the best of men couldn't pull this off. It seems that young Master Jun had met the Snake King in those 2 days. Moreover, they must have taken a fancy to each other, and would have fallen for each other. Thereupon, the Snake King would have gotten emotional over their relationship after Jun Moxie left TNFA. So, she must have followed him through our journey here. Moreover, I even remember that Jun Moxie used to vanish many times in those days. So, it turned out to be a matter of a lover's tryst. Dang! This playboy. He even managed to fool around with a beast king. Solitary Falcon had even drawn an outline, the dialogues, and the overall script for a drama in his head in such a short period of time. Moreover, he had even developed the connecting threads. And, the more he thought about it, the more he felt that those things would have possibly happened in that manner. Solitary Falcon truly wanted to prostrate himself in admiration at this moment. Who could have seduced such a beautiful woman even if she had hailed from the mortal society? But, that young Master Jun has quietly managed to seduce a beast king from TNFA. He's a very valiant man. His skill and charms are truly extraordinary. It had to be said that the Solitary Falcon's line of thinking was a bit excessive. But it wasn't very far from the truth. He had merely mistaken the youngster's real target. These two individuals were talking as if no one else was present there. However, Huang Taiyang was a great master-level powerhouse from one of the three holy lands. He was an extremely skilled person from the secret world. But his questions had gone ignored and unanswered. A person with such an identity and cultivation had been given a cold shoulder, and was left to the side. Huang Taiyang tried to endure this insult at first. But the other two were merely talking after meeting each other, and weren't giving him any importance. This obviously made the Huang ancestor very angry. His anger eventually broke out, and he roared. Then, he spoke up in a malicious manner. "You brats! How dare you give this old man no face? How dare you act like this old man isn't present here? This old man will show you how fierce he is." A "whoo" sound was heard as the silhouette of the ignored Huang Taiyang flew down from the top of the tower. His white hair started to move behind him. And his hands made strange revolving gestures in the air as he fluttered downwards in a frustrated manner. Everyone present on the scene suddenly felt a very strange sensation the moment his figure dropped down. It was a very abrupt feeling. Everyone had suddenly felt that they had lost control over their bodies. This move seemed very awkward. Even their mouths and noses felt blocked to the point of suffocation. And they couldn't help but be shocked as a result. That charging move by Huang Taiyang had seemingly moved away the air from this area. And that big courtyard had seemingly become a vacuum zone as a result. In fact, it seemed that the central point of this anomaly had become some kind of swirling vortex of Xian Qi. And they felt as if this vortex was seemingly attracting their bodies to plunge towards itself. However, an individual would surely be left to the mercy of Huang Taiyang's manipulations if they were to fall into this vortex. The results of this technique were somewhat similar to that of the word cage. But their relative strength differed by a massive margin. After all, this technique hadn't reached that level wherein the attacker would only have to raise their hand to deal with an enemy. But this move was still capable of shocking everyone. The four people present in that area circulated their Xian strength at the same time. The one with the lowest strength amongst Jun Zhantian, Jun Wu Yi, Green Hunter, and Solitary Falcon was at the Sky Xian level. Therefore, everyone had managed to react in time. However, the weaker ones would lose control if they were to fall into the range of this attack. The Jun father and son knew that they weren't strong enough, and would only be a burden to their side if they acted rashly. So, they quickly turned around, and ferociously tried to escape the swirling vortex's dominion. The solitary Falcon waved his hand in order to toss the two away from the vortex's range. Jun Xie turned his body around once he had escaped to safety. However, he saw the hair of the solitary Falcon and the Snake King fluttering in the air. They had already begun fighting Huang by this time. The two of them had made similar kinds of movements. The solitary Falcon had spread his arms and had started to rotate in order to counteract the formidable pull from the center of the vacuum area. His two bird-like claws were making screamed sounds in the wind. The Snake King was revolving in the opposite direction. Then, she suddenly became motionless for a second. Her body then shot up in the air and charged at Huang in a manner similar to that of a slithering snake. That wind screamed violently as the solitary Falcon rose into the air. He had shot up like a bird of prey. He rose to a good height first. Then, he suddenly swooped down the next moment. These two individuals had attacked from both above and below, like a soaring falcon and a venom-spitting snake. Moreover, their collaborative attack became nearly seamless in a flash. The fatal combination of the falcon and the snake. Huang shouted in a sharp tone, "Those are insignificant moves. This is only like the splendor displayed by a small pearl." His body suddenly started to revolve in a strange manner. It was like he had turned into nothingness. However, the entire sky was suddenly filled with millions of densely packed fists the next moment. In fact, it seemed as if millions of people had shot their fists forwards. Solitary Falcon roared. Ghostly Falcon. His body flew upwards as his claw bore down in torrents in an earth-shattering manner. A green light flashed in the Snake King's eyes as this happened. Then, several hair-like thin, dark shadows shot out from her body. They then rocketed towards her enemy. They had charged towards his arms, legs, and his head. Huang became flabbergasted for a second. Then, he snorted coldly. How can there be so many snakes in such a cold winter season? His hands flapped, and those numerous shadows were sent flying in all directions. However, the Snake King and solitary Falcon had approached close to his body by now. There was a bang as the three people were sent flying in three different directions. But the three people hadn't even stopped moving backwards when they suddenly reversed their directions in unison. This led to the formation of dozens of their afterimages. Then, they again swept towards the same area in a manner so violent that even thunderbolts wouldn't be able to dissuade them. Jun Xie and Jun Moxie were on the same side as the solitary Falcon and the Snake King. They could faintly see the three people's kicks and punches at first. But they had barely blinked when the speed of those three increased rather exponentially. In fact, it was almost like the three had suddenly turned into shadows and had gotten merged into one entity. There was only the violently screaming and ripping gale now. And this gale was charging towards the north, south, east and west. These three individuals went fighting from the ground to the air. And then, from the air to the ground again. Whatever place they crossed, turned into a mess. The flowers and leaves would scatter into the air. However, they would then be turned into weapons that would be used to attack the enemy. The flowers, the leaves, the bamboo shoots, everything would be turned into weapons to be used for injuring one's opponent. In fact, these items were being used to such effect that they could even kill an individual. Solitary Falcon and the Snake King were known for their speed and agility. The eighth great master's ferocity was matchless, while the Green Hunter was peerlessly venomous. Falcon and Snake are natural enemies. But these two had combined their attacks in such a manner wherein their weaknesses were being concealed by the other's strengths. It must be mentioned that these two individuals were coordinating their moves for the first time. So, it wasn't fully seamlessly too honest. But their combined powers were still rendering an effect that was enough to contend against an existence greater than the Great Master level. However, the speed of Huang Taiyang's movements was astonishing. It wasn't less than those of the other two by any margin. His Xian strength was very profound. In fact, it was far stronger than those of his two opponents. His two opponents had certainly collaborated to form a seamless pair. However, Huang Taiyang still hadn't fallen into a disadvantageous position. An average person could never jump into this fight between these three people. After all, these people were launching innumerable attacks in every moment. However, they were also resisting innumerable attacks within that same frame of time. Jun Zhantian's Xian level of Spirit Xian middle ranks was the strongest amongst those watching the fight. But he still couldn't distinguish who the enemy was, or who was on his side. So, it would be pointless if he were to hastily rush in to provide assistance. After all, his involvement would only be superfluous since he wouldn't be able to provide any real help. The Huang ancestor was indeed deserving of being called a great expert who had made his name famous for hundreds of years. His strength was genuinely extraordinary. He had never been on his back foot ever since he had begun fighting the solitary Falcon and the Snake King. In fact, he had even had an upper hand in the beginning. But the solitary Falcon and the Snake King's cooperation had started becoming increasingly better with the passage of time. And the two had started fighting even more harmoniously as a result. Their moves had quickly started to become increasingly seamless. Consequently, they had started to succeed in suppressing Huang Taiyang. In fact, they were even able to take initiative on their own. But defeating the Huang ancestor was still a rather difficult matter. Huang Taiyang had remained calm during this entire time. He had consolidated at every step, and hadn't become anxious or mad. In fact, the corners of his mouth had slowly turned into a sneer. It seemed that Huang Taiyang was assured that he could still beat the Jun family and achieve his aim if they only had these two experts in their support. Solitary Falcon laughed whilst being intoxicated with the battle. This is truly satisfying. I can fight to my heart's content. However, the solitary Falcon's body came to an abrupt standstill in mid-air as he roared this sentence out. Then, he quickly charged back into the fray. It turned out that the solitary Falcon had met with a powerful and resolute palm attack. However, he had still decided to attack instead of moving to his defense. Suddenly, a bloody aura burst out of the solitary Falcon's body as he prepared to face the tyrannical pressure from such an exceptional expert. His hair fluttered as he charged recklessly while disregarding his own safety. In fact, the solitary Falcon was geared to take on nearly 80% momentum of Huang Taiyang's ferocious attack in doing so. However, the enormous pressure the Snake King had been facing would also reduce because of his actions. But how could a Beast King from Tian Fa accept an advantage at someone else's expense? So, she gave a loud hiss as her body turned a cruel green in color. Then, her body rose to the sky like a javelin. She had attacked right on top of Huang Taiyang's head. However, her body suddenly split into 8 images when she arrived close. Then, the 8 Snake Kings attacked at the same time. Huang Taiyang's hair and beard flew upwards as he shouted, "Good! Come on!" His palms thunderously shot up to attack. The corners of the Snake King's mouth curled into a sneer. There was a bang as her body flashed. Then, the Snake King's pretty silhouette covered the entire sky. Someone watching from the side would have felt as if the entire battlefield had been filled with images of the Snake King. Huang Taiyang was startled upon seeing this, and couldn't prevent his eyes from exposing a trace of shock. The solitary falcon was also charging downwards at this time. The cruel sneer hung at the corner of his mouth had made it evident that he was descending for a ruthless strike. After all, there was only one area he could use to complement the Snake King's killer move, the sky. Therefore, the ghostly falcon descended. Huang Taiyang roared at first. Then, he smirked in anger as he counterattacked with everything he had. There were successive bangs, and a thunderous flash as the Snake King's 9 palms resolutely struck their target. They weren't false strikes in any way. And they fiercely struck the Huang ancestors back in an explosive manner. Meanwhile, the solitary falcon's 7 claws forcibly grabbed his chest. Huang Taiyang laughed wildly as he made no attempts to evade these attacks. In fact, there was a bang, bang, bang as he used 3 palm attacks to repel the solitary falcon. Meanwhile, his leg kicked out like a tornado to repel the Snake King. The Snake King issued a stuffy groan, but she counterattacked with a kick of her own. Therefore, the 3 individuals ended up sustaining injury at the same time. But those 3 individuals were considered and revered as tyrannical personalities amongst the many peak experts of their age. So, how could they endure such a thing? They went berserk and roared out at the same time. They then charged in to attack again. In fact, they had decided to attack with everything they had. The 3 roars echoed as these 3 rushed to the highest heavens. This led to a sudden change of situation in the sky since the clouds above the Tianxiang city had dispersed in reply. And the depth of the night sky was revealed as a result. Explosive sounds were resonating from time to time. The Snake King's cold curses, the solitary falcon's maddened laughs, and Huang Taiyang's loud roars were also echoing amidst the chaos. Suddenly, a very loud bang sound was heard. This sudden and loud sound elicited a very tyrannical reaction. In fact, it seemed that the entire Tianxiang city had been subjected to violent tremors. This loud explosion was accompanied by a surge of irresistible power. Jun Zhantian and Jun Wuyi were watching the whole thing from the sides. However, they were blown away to a distance of more than 30 meters. Then, there were loud 2 bangs as their backs hit the walls. In fact, the impact had even knocked the wind out of their systems. The shadows of the 3 people smashed down like meteorites. Solitary Falcon stumbled as the 3 people fell down. He took 2 steps back and tried to stand his ground in a forceful manner. But his chest had been struck by a ferociously powerful attack from Huang Taiyang. And the backward momentum induced by that attack was still a bit too strong for the solitary falcon to nullify. Therefore, he couldn't prevent himself from retreating another 2 steps. However, he was able to hold his position thereafter. His face had become slightly red and somewhat pale. Blood was slowly flowing out from the corner of his mouth. However, it seemed like the glittering colors of his passion. The Snake King had descended like a kite without string. She had flipped several times as she had tumbled through the air. Then, she had landed on the ground whilst staggering. Her pretty face had turned pale by now. Her legs had seemingly gotten rooted to the ground, but her upper body was still reclining backwards. And this was forcing her face to look upwards. Meanwhile, her long hair was floating behind her head in strange manner with hissing sounds. Huang Taiyang also fell to the ground loudly and spun twice. His previously neatly combed hair was in a complete mess now. It now ped over his shoulder in a malicious manner. His face belied his fury as he let out a roar. Then, he violently waved his arms, and dozens of purplish objects fluttered down from his body like butterflies. It turned out that Huang Taiyang wasn't able to block the moves of the solitary Falcon and the Snake King in one instance during the battle. Consequently, he had faced the 9 palms and 7 claws. He possessed an excellent cultivation. So, his tough body could bear those strikes. But, his purple gown had been shredded in 16 places by that attack. And, the vestiges of those 16 strikes had detached from his robe and fallen to the ground since the 3 people had finally separated. They floated down. The shredded purple gown resembled a beggar's clothes now. However, this had also exposed the soft golden armor he was wearing inside. Golden rays were flickering on it. Jun Moxie had been hiding while the fighting was taking place. However, he was left to gasp cold air at this time. The young master was well aware of how terrifying the attacks of Solitary Falcon and the Snake King were. But, those ferocious 16 gown shredding attacks had seemingly had no effect on the Huang Ancestor. What is this guy wearing? That supple golden object must have had some role to play in this. But, the old man's strength is very profound. Moreover, the toughness of his body has also reached an extremely shocking degree. It's not surprising that Mei Shuayan had said that my exceptional and quick attacks would be useless against a genuine great master-level expert. Even my exceptionally sharp sword would bear no fruit against someone that strong. I must admit that even my sneak attack might not work against this Huang Taiyang. There's actually something as strange as this in this world. Jun Moxie rejoiced in secrecy since he felt that he was fortunately to not have used his divine sword in order to mount a sneak attack. Otherwise, he would have received the shorter end of the stick post his endeavor. Huang Taiyang silently bowed his head to look at his now shredded purple clothes. He then looked up heavily. The old man smiled in a manner that didn't make it seem as if he was smiling. Then, he spoke in a dark manner. This is remarkable. This old man hasn't sustained an injuries in God knows how many years. But, you brats have somehow achieved this result. This is a strange and new feeling. Ha ha ha, ah. I'm satisfied. I'm very satisfied. He stopped and looked at Solitary Falcon. Your reputation isn't undeserved. Solitary Falcon. This old man admits that the 8th great master's reputation isn't undeserved. But, it's a shame that you've to die right after receiving this old man's acknowledgement. It's honestly a lamentable matter. Solitary Falcon laughed and sneered. Whether I die or not, or even when and how I die, has nothing to do with whatever you say or believe in. Huang Taiyang ignored him and looked at the Snake King in a malicious manner. He then put on a dignified expression as he said, You're also quite remarkable, young girl. This old man hopes that his eyes haven't gotten weaker with age, but you must be the distinguished Snake King of the Tianfa forest if my guess isn't incorrect. You still dare to call me a young girl, even though you know I'm a beast king from Tianfa? You've got big guts. Huang Taiyang. You're too cocky. You're barely 200 years old. Yet, you're still acting like an elder in front of me? The Snake King showed no quarter as she mocked back. Ha ha. The Snake King is an old being. But, your age equates to its human equivalent when you appear in this human form. Therefore, the Snake King from Tianfa doesn't look a day older than 30. But, this old man has spent 200 years living through the springs and autumns in this flesh. So, it won't be right if I didn't call you a young girl, would it? Don't tell me that you want this old man to call you a fishy-smelling snake instead. The Huang Ancestor laughed evilly as he spoke those malicious words. Disgraceful. What are you saying? Are you saying that I smell fishy? The Snake King had the appearance of a girl who hadn't even reached her 20s. So, her corresponding temperament wasn't calm enough. And this trait had particularly been exposed since these words had attacked her physical defects. After all, women have always had a love for appearing beautiful. Therefore, Huang Taiyang's words had suddenly infuriated her. I had thought that the Jun finally had climbed up the ranks with the backing of a mysterious master. And I had taken that to be the reason why they had dared to oppose our illusory ocean of blood so blatantly. But I've now found that it was the Snake King from Tien Fa who was backing them. He. I guess that's a good disguise to work with. However, it's a pity though. After all, that name could have left this senior to dread 200 years ago. But nowadays, the Tien Fa forest became yesterday's news a long time ago. It doesn't even have enough qualifications to be considered a holy land anymore. Moreover, you people are nothing in front of the strong experts of my illusory ocean of blood. In fact, you're nothing but an insignificant snake. Don't tell me that you think you're a dragon or something. Haha. Huang Taiyang's expression became increasingly eccentric as he mocked her. The Tien Fa forest may not be as strong as it used to be in the past. But the thieves trained by your illusory ocean of blood still aren't much in the eyes of my Tien Fa. A light flashed in Green Hunter's eyes. It was evident that she was looking for an opportunity to attack. That old man's words had already managed to annoy her. So, how could she go without giving vent to her anger? But the Snake King appearance at this place has genuinely come as a shock to this old man. A very bright light flashed in Huang Taiyang's eyes as noticed that the Snake King's right hand was trembling in anger. So, he then spoke up with the intention of making her even angrier. I've heard that the Jun family's brat is so shameless that he didn't even spare his own sister-in-law. People say that he has even taken her virginity. In fact, he didn't even seem regretful about his actions. But it seems that the brat commands genuine skills when it comes to dealing with women. Ha. The ancestor Huang's glare became dark as he continued. I had heard that the despicable brat had gone to the Tien Fa forest some time ago. Don't tell me that the Snake King was also swindled by that brat. Did he take advantage of the Snake King as well? Is that the reason she couldn't prevent herself from following him here to this Tianxiang city? You're not stinting at anything. In fact, you seem to be using your power to gain favor with him. Well, you can't be blamed for this. After all, you've taken the appearance of a beautiful woman. And that brat must have turned up in front of you as a Prince Charming. I suppose. Haha. But does that lowly debauchee of the Jun family have enough skill to satisfy someone as distinguished as the Snake King? This old man can introduce you to some people who can satisfy you if he's falling short. Ha. Infuriate. Huang Taiyang's intention was to infuriate the Snake King. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 507. Huang Taiyang's tragedy. You're disgraceful. You're a mean and lowly person. You still fancy to call yourself a man from the three holy lands. I will kill you. The Snake King was furious, and her body was about to shoot out. But Huang Taiyang laughed heartily as he prepared to welcome the attack. After all, this was exactly what he had intended. He was more powerful than the both of his opponents. But the solitary Falcon and the Snake King complemented each other very well. They could form a formidable force if they coordinated with each other. And that would increase their effective strength output by 2 to 3 folds. There was a possibility that he could still defeat them despite their teamwork. But he would have to pay a heavy price for it. Therefore, he had decided to provoke one individual. And he would use this opportunity to kill that said individual in a single stroke. Consequently, the situation would fall under his control. This was also the reason why he hadn't hesitated while unraveling his identity, and hadn't put a check on his filthy words. However, he hadn't expected for it to work this easily. After all, this was a commonly used trick. There had been a lot of contempt in his body language when those words of provocation had left his mouth. However, he had then begun concentrating the entirety of his bodily strength since he was preparing to face his enemy. He was prepared to go to any lengths in order to kill the Snake King in a single stroke. There was still a chance that he may not succeed in killing her. However, he wanted to injure her so severely that she'd be rendered incapable of fighting afterwards. After all, the situation would fall under his control if things worked out in this manner. Huang Taiyang's eyes flashed with an ominous glint. His murderous intentions had been revealed. The sound of tiny explosions echoed as his Xian strength concentrated in one place. All these aspects were a precursor that he had readied this entire strength and skill to make a decisive move. H wouldn't allow the Snake King to escape from his grip. After all, this kind of an opportunity was extremely rare to come by. His plans were on the verge of materializing. The figures of Huang Taiyang and the Snake King were about to come in contact. However, a graceful figure suddenly frittered into the sky at this time, and shouted, "Go back." The Snake King heard this individual's command, and she followed the voice in spite of everything. She retreated, and returned to her original place in a flash. Moreover, her body language had shown no traces of hesitation or disobedience in doing so. Huang Taiyang stared blankly for a second. Then, he raised his head to look at the source of the sound. However, he suddenly discovered that a lustrous palm shadow had arrived before him. And he suddenly lost his breath due to the overwhelming shock of this moment. This person has been hiding on the sidelines this entire time. But I was completely unaware of it. Who is this person? This makes it rather obvious that this person's strength isn't lower than mine. Suddenly, pangs of extreme remorse aroused in his heart. It seems that the person who had spoken out at the beginning was none other than this individual who has showed up at this time. However, I had mistakenly believed that it was the Snake King's voice. Consequently, I stopped paying attention to the sounds around me when the Snake King appeared. Who would have imagined that the enemies had been concealing such a supermaster this entire time? How terrible would things become if this person was to team up with the solitary Falcon and the Snake King? He quickly retreated as these thoughts crossed his mind. However, that single palm shadow had already changed into a densely packed palm mountain by now. Suddenly, a loud sound echoed as that incisive palm strike charged through the air. It turned out that this individual's attacking speed had exceeded the speed of sound propagation. Numerous palms flashed and rumbled through the air. It seemed as if they would destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth. It appeared as if the doors of the hell had burst open, and millions of demons had come out. This strike was certain to kill. This one strike was akin to the fatal blow. It could be said that Mei Shuayan had been feeling extremely gloomy this entire time. She hadn't intended to undertake this task at first. However, she had decided to reveal herself in this critical moment. Besides, Huang Taiyang's words had made her very angry. Dang it! Who was he referring to when he was talking about using a woman's body part? Was this old fool making an indirect remark at me? Thereupon, the beautiful Mei Shuayan rushed out while spitting anger. She also brought 999 palm strikes along with her. Mei Shuayan launched this attack. However, she suddenly felt as if the gloominess that had been plaguing her heart had been erased to some extent. And she somehow felt much better as a result. In fact, it seemed that beating up someone in this tyrannical manner was a good way to give a vent to the anger which had been locked inside her heart for a very long time. Therefore, Mei Shuayan didn't let up. And Huang Taiyang's body turned into a punching bag as a result. A proper punching bag at that. It could be said that Huang Taiyang's tragedy bore a certain aspect of similarity to Li Jutian's. After all, both of them had landed in similar situation because of one person, Jun Moxie. That's because he was real reason why Mei Shuayan was angry in both cases. Huang Taiyang was caught off guard in the face of these attacks. He continually retreated backwards. But could the speed of his retreat ever match Mei Shuayan's frightening momentum? Their strengths had anyways differed by a significant margin. Moreover, Mei Shuayan had also consumed the vitality linkage pill a while ago. And her speed had ascended to a terrifying level as a result. Bang! Bang! A series of flesh-pulping sounds echoed as a flurry of palm attacks landed on the old man's body. In fact, these sounds were similar to the explosive sounds that are caused by firecrackers. Huang Taiyang screamed in pain as his body flew out like a kite without a string. Eventually, he lost control over himself and started to spurt blood from his mouth. His strong and unbreakable body had sustained serious injuries by the first round of his counterpart's attacks. There were blood stains at the corner of his mouth by the time he somehow tottered his way away. In fact, he looked like a ghost. He then asked in a mournful and distorted tone, "Who are you? Who the hell are you?" It was a pity that Huang Taiyang got an even more ferocious volley of attacks in reply. These attacks weren't merely wild and intense, they were extremely deadly as well. Huang Taiyang screamed while confronting this shadow of death. He hadn't even been able to see this man's appearance until now. Instead, he only seen a vague silhouette, and had heard that clear and melodious voice. However, he was receiving waves upon waves of attacks. In fact, he had been taking a series of heavy blows. Huang Taiyang had never even dreamt that a human body was capable of reaching such a level of supremacy. His entire body had suffered bad injuries, be it vital parts or not. He used to believe that he had an indestructible body, but it had showed no resistance capabilities in the face of these attacks. However, his body wasn't the only thing had was suffering. Even his spirit was experiencing only one kind of sensation at this moment: pain. He hadn't tasted this strange feeling for the last 100 years or more. Therefore, he had gradually forgotten of its existence. And this was the reason why this sun that scorches 1,000 mountains had become so unbridled and arrogant with the passage of time. However, he was finally getting to taste this long-forgotten flavor of fear again. He had assessed that his assailant didn't intend to take his life. After all, his opponent's strength was enough to kill him whenever he wanted to. Huang Taiyang wasn't aware of the reason why this individual was acting in this manner, nor could he understand why this individual wasn't trying to kill him. However, he could tell that this individual was enraged, and was only trying to venting their anger on him. Huang Taiyang had certainly figured that this individual hadn't intended on killing him. But the old man also knew he wouldn't be left with enough strength to escape if these half-hearted fatal attacks continued to rain on him in this manner. After all, these attacks would end up crumbling his fighting abilities even though they wouldn't kill him. Huang Taiyang made an effort to arouse his Xian strength. Then, he roared and swept skywards. However, his back was struck with a series of 4 palms as he was rising. But could this also be regarded as a lucky incident? After all, wouldn't he be able to escape by using the momentum provided by these strikes? Jun Moxie had been watching the fight from his place of hiding. However, he shouted out in excitement at this moment, "Don't let him go. Catch him alive." Solitary Falcon and Snake King leapt forward at the same time. They then chased after Huang Taiyang at a lightning speed. However, they weren't acting upon the young master's desire. They had done so because this donghua Huang Taiyang had tried to kill them a moment ago. And this had already tied a knot of hatred in their hearts. So, they obviously wanted to kill this old man in one fell swoop. This was particularly true for the Snake King. Mei Shuayan had rescued her when she had made that mistake. Else, she was bound to suffer a severe injury. In fact, she would have probably seen a major decrease in the layer of her strength level because of that injury. And that would have meant that she may have lost her qualifications for taking on a human form. Moreover, this dubious old man had also attempted to slander her reputation with her words a short while ago. The Snake King was obviously very angry. So, how could she let him go when she harbored such a grudge against him? It must be said that the solitary Falcon and Huang Taiyang didn't have any deep-seated feud. But this was a great opportunity to pulverize an already defeated enemy. So, how would he not wish to kill a man who wanted to kill him? Huang Taiyang jumped upwards and got away from this shadow of death's range of attack. He breathed a sigh of relief. However, he then discovered that the dreadful white figure had disappeared without a trace. That white figure hadn't pursued to attack him. His mind could help slacking off to some extent since that shadow of death had left. But he had realized one thing very clearly: this place can turn out to be a very painful venture. He hurried towards the wall. He secretly swore that he wouldn't return here if his strength was still lower than that of the Jun family. Facing this indescribable strength is like offering myself on a platter. Suddenly, he noticed something obscure in front. The solitary falcon's powerful claws were approaching to grab his skull. Huang Taiyang howled in anger when he saw this. It's true that he wasn't in good condition at this time, but he still didn't need to fear the solitary falcon. Therefore, he also counterattacked. Solitary Falcon snorted and smiled. Then, he forcibly directed his claws downwards. The claws of both the parties clashed. And Huang Taiyang was left to yell out in a maddened frenzy. It turned out that he wasn't able to beat the solitary falcon. Moreover, the top of his shoulder had been drenched with blood due to this clash. But this was also reasonable from one perspective. After all, he had already suffered Mei Shuayan's numerous palm attacks. But still, he was lucky that Mei Shuayan had only given vent to the gloominess of her heart. He would have turned into a pile of mincemeat if she had desired to kill him instead. In fact, there was a good chance that he would have ended up becoming meat sauce. However, he had suffered severe injuries even though he had gotten somewhat lucky in the overall. In fact, his internal organs and meridians had already suffered damage. But he still placed himself too highly. Therefore, he hadn't given much importance to this clash with the solitary falcon. In fact, he believed that he'd be able to defend at will, like he would have under normal circumstances. Moreover, he had felt that he would also be able to counter-attack the solitary falcon in order to force him back. But things weren't as easy as he had taken them to be. And he wasn't able to rally enough strength to parry. Huang Taiyang suffered at the solitary falcon's claws. And another deadly wound was added to his body. But he still managed to summon his Xian strength in order to rush towards the wall with half-blooded madness. But the Snake King was already waiting for him there. She smiled coldly and said, "What happened, old man? Why are you in such a hurry? You can leave after you've paid the price for your filthy words." It was needless to say that her hands and feet attacked at the same time. The Snake King was very similar to Mei Shuayan in some ways. So, how could her strikes not be deadly as well? Moreover, she had intended to go for the killer move. Huang Taiyang felt very tragic in this moment. He was very regretful. In fact, he regretted this beyond measure. After all, he had decided to charge into the Jun family all by himself. Then, he had even put forth a challenge in a majestic and awe-inspiring manner even though he didn't have any backup. He had even tried to flaunt his overbearing strength. But, how would he have known that he had poked a massive nest of hornets by doing so? The hornets had stuck onto his entire face as a result. Moreover, the sting of these hornets weren't merely fierce, they were poisonous as well. Huang Taiyang howled in misery as his blood splashed out. After all, he received 13 tight palms and 6 leg shots from the Snake King. However, this man still lived up to the name of 3 holy lands. And that's because he still had some strength left. He swept in the sky and hurried to escape. Moreover, his speed had accelerated to an extent that was rarely seen. The solitary Falcon and the Snake King were known for their speed and agility. But these two got angry when they saw him escape at that speed. And that's because they had realized that they would fall short. The Snake King and solitary Falcon were overwhelmed with shock to see him escape. Huang Taiyang truly deserved to be called an existence above the great master level. He was hit by Mei Shuayan's numerous attacks first. Then, he was struck by the solitary Falcon. After that, he was badly beaten up by the Snake King. However, he surprisingly still had the strength to escape at such a speed. It must be said that his skills were frightening. He was genuinely an existence superior to the great master level. Solitary Falcon and Snake King had realized that Mei Shuayan hadn't intended on killing this old man. However, they harbored tremendous rage towards Huang Taiyang. One must have the ability to finish matters if intend on starting a feud. Huang Taiyang had already received a series of wild and ferocious attacks from 3 great experts. And he had sustained hundreds of injuries. However, he was still all set to escape away. This was genuinely appalling. But Huang Taiyang was already a spent force now. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 508. Stunning Sword Strike. Huang Taiyang's figure quickly shot up high into the sky while blood dripped from his body. He flew over 18 to 20 meters. His golden armor was shining quite conspicuously under the bright moonlight. Solitary Falcon and the Snake King couldn't catch up with him at this time since he had covered this much distance. After all, the Huang Ancestor's speed was too fast. In fact, no one except for the extremely beautiful Mei Shuayan could catch him now. Huang Taiyang turned around while fleeing and gave a sharp roar. "You brat of the Jun family! You've mounted such a sneak attack on this old man. I swear to take my revenge. I swear to not be called a man if I don't flatten the Jun residents. Moreover, you've mounted a sneak attack on me whilst remaining hidden in the sidelines. This old man won't let you off. This old man will show you what courting death means for having the cheek to do such a thing." He was aware that his life wasn't in danger anymore. But his defeat and ill treatment that evening had still left him feeling sullen. Therefore, there was no way that he wouldn't attempt to take revenge later. Huang Taiyang's body had been dropping to lower altitudes throughout his flight. After all, he had used up a lot of his Xian Qi. So, he was falling rather quickly as a result. He gasped for air from his nose and mouth at the same time, and took off again the moment his legs touched the ground. The old man had enough strength to make his escape by fly-jumping 2 or 3 times. Huang Taiyang's mind was brimming with malicious thoughts and plans of vengeance. He had walked the wider society for 200 years. Had he ever suffered such a humiliating defeat before? There had been times in the past where he'd been entangled with other families who harbored deep hatred towards him. He had often been surrounded by hundreds of experts. However, he had always killed 7 of 8 of them by charging into their ranks. And he'd then make an unhurried escape from the battle. However, he had never expected that this seemingly harmless and insignificant Jun family would nearly take his life. A flame of seemingly endless rage was burning inside his chest. And his severe internal injuries had filled his mind with even more hatred. He had even counted. I was attacked by no less than 200 palms in quick succession. It's also fortunate that this old man had come alone. Wouldn't the others from my faction been beaten to minced meat here? Huang Taiyang had forgotten that the last of these individuals hadn't intended to kill him. Instead, he only remembered that he had been attacked by over 200 palms. His hatred was extreme. In fact, it was irreconcilable. The old man would certainly give vent to his hatred. In fact, this hatred was so extreme that it had been engraved in his mind forever. His feet were barely a hair's breadth away the ground. He would leap into the air the moment the tip of his toes would touch the ground. I'll annihilate the Jun family. How can a family from the regular society ever provoke the anger of a holy land beyond the mortal realms? He couldn't make any reprisals at this moment. In fact, he was still running away. But his mind was flooded with pleasurable thoughts of the indescribable tortures he would inflict. He was even imagining the various methods he'd use to torture and humiliate the Jun family's members. I'll pay them back 100 times for today's humiliation. No, 1,000 times. 10,000 times. 100,000 times. He didn't wish to make reprisals for his family's enmity alone anymore. He also wanted to do it for the injuries he had suffered. I can't tolerate this. I won't let them off. The Jun family's members won't be the only ones. Even the members of their wives' families, visitors and friends, anyone who has any relationship with the Jun family, all of them will suffer from my revenge. All of them will suffer my bloody revenge. The Huang ancestor had sworn this. He considered for a bit. Then, he shouted out, Jun family. I'll trample all of you in the future. I won't be considered a man if I allow even a single dog to slip away. So, you people must enjoy the amount of time you have left. Ha ha ha. That cruel roar had shaken the entire night sky. However, a cold voice replied at this moment, You won't be considered a man? That's not even a funny joke. Do you think that you can still be considered a man? You befuddled fool. Do you think you can leave alive? A genuinely scorching sun appeared in front of Huang Taiyang along with those cold words. The extremely bright sun rays filled his eyes. This glowing sun emitted bright multicolored rays in all directions. It was undoubtedly far more dazzling than this Huang Taiyang, the sun who scorches 1,000 mountains. Those countless multicolored rays of light issued uncountable sword auras as they lit up the dark night sky from high above. Then, those glowing sword lights merged as they flew towards Huang Taiyang's weak throat like a lightning. It was going to strike him in mid-flight. That sword strike had ingeniously grasped the most opportune moment to approach him. In fact, its angle of approach was so mischievous that this 200-year-old supreme expert Huang Taiyang felt like cursing. In fact, he felt like cursing in the most malicious language. However, he didn't have time to do that. In fact, he wouldn't have wasted whatever little energy he had left on cursing out loud even if he had gotten the time for it. And that's because he wouldn't have been left with any time to react if he had done so. The person who had struck that fatal blow was obviously none other than Jun Moxie. Young Master Jun had been hiding for quite a while in wait for such a great opportunity to spring his ambush. So, how could he let such an opportunity slip by? He had cultivated a very sharp sense of assassination in his previous life. And it had helped him determine that Huang Taiyang had lost his strength a fair amount of time back. And this meant that he could kill this old man as long as he was able to take advantage of the proper opportunity. I may never get such a rare opportunity again if I miss it at this time. Therefore, Jun Moxie had decided to attack with everything he had. It was needless to mention the speed, the angle, and the opportune moment. After all, Jun Moxie had even considered the air resistance before he had launched this attack. Therefore, Jun Moxie was very confident. Even the greatest assassin of this generation, Chu Chi-hun, couldn't have produced such a divine sword attack. This sword attack was the absolute best any assassin could achieve. This sword attack was akin to a legendary strike for any assassin. This was a sword attack which would deliver a fatal blow and kill for certain. Not only would it chop at its target, it would chop them to extinction. Mei Shuayan was standing afar and was observing everything. So, she had obviously seen that splendidly shining sword attack. It had reached the pinnacle of skill. That breathtaking sword attack had left her amazed. But it had also left her to feel somewhat ashamed. She implored herself and realized that even she wouldn't have been able to exploit this opportunity with such perfection. That Jun Moxie's swordsmanship, or specifically, his assassination swordsmanship, has surprisingly reached a level of such wondrous perfection. However, a doubt also emerged in her mind. This brat is an assassin by his very nature. Or, he's a born assassin. Otherwise, how could a brat who is not even 18 years old be capable of issuing such a perfectly resplendent sword attack? Even the people who possess hundreds of years of cultivation won't be able to hide from such a sword attack despite having reached the great master level of above. Venerable Mei, the most powerful individual from Tien Fa, also felt somewhat inferior to that sword attack. Don't tell me that he can kill a great master level exert by using his mere sky Xian strength? However, this is happening right now in front of everyone present. Huang Taiyang's toes hadn't touched land at this moment. However, his toes could feel the approaching ground. It was close. There was only a tiny gap in between. But that tiny gap seemed a world away. The entire body seemed like a tilting candle that was trying its hardest to fall down. In fact, he had exhaled the air he had just gasped in, and was waiting to take another gulp in order to escape. But it was in that tiny space of time that this killer sword attack had suddenly made its appearance. This space of time was infinitely subtle, but it was enough for this deadly sword attack. Huang Taiyang issued a shriek of despair. He didn't even have the time to think about making his escape at this time, since this sword was about to strike him in a moment. His body faced upwards with the final burst of strength. He hit his chest with his fist and sent the aura in his dantian shaking. This instantly aroused the last remnants of aura within his body. Then, a column of blood rushed forth from his mouth and shot towards the attacking sword like a javelin. He knew that would lose the greater part of his Xian strength because of this move he was making. In fact, he would never be able to restore his strength to its current peak even after his injuries had been cured. But he had no choice in the matter. That was because this was the only way he could save his life. After all, a big hole would be pierced into his throat if he didn't do this. What would be better, losing half of his life's worth of cultivation, or losing his life? Even a 3-year-old child could answer this. And this was Huang Taiyang, a man who cherished life very dearly. A hope of living on is often the greatest desire of old men. He had already lived for over 200 years, but he wanted to live for 200 more. He still hadn't enjoyed the beautiful things of life to his heart's content. He still wanted to maintain the pinnacle of his glory. Therefore, he had preferred to cripple himself if could somehow escape with his life. After all, one needn't worry about firewood as long as the forests are around. The swordlight had approached so close that it had even incited a knot of cold inside Huang Taiyang's neck. The blood arrow suddenly shot forth. It passed the swordlight and went towards Jun Moxie. However, the young master merely tilted his head. The blood arrow nearly hit his ear. It then went whooshing by the sides of his temple and sent his hair flowing. Then, it flew into the empty sky. However, Huang Taiyang had managed to distance his body from that deadly sword attack in this brief moment that wasn't even enough to blink one's eyes. But his body was still dropping to the ground. His toes eventually reached the ground as his body descended. However, they faltered. Therefore, his heels hit the ground with such force that lots of dirt was stirred upwards. This dirt then shot towards Jun Moxie and Huang Taiyang's body like numerous concealed weapons as the old man's body glided on the ground at a very sharp speed. In fact, the reactionary effect his body produced against the ground was similar to the one produced by a swordfish gliding through the water's surface. His back pressed tightly against the ground as his body went sliding. This sliding motion exhausted the remaining of Huang Taiyang's strength as slid to nearly 150 meters on his back. In fact, he had slid so fast on his back that the friction produced against the ground had resulted in a strange green smoke. His skin had been scorched as a result, and was emitting a strange smell at this time. That extreme speed of sliding had scorched the skin on his back. He wasn't thinking about where he was sliding to at this time. In fact, he wasn't thinking of anything. The old man was only shooting backwards like an arrow. Then, there was a bang, since a wall collapsed as his head hit the Jun family's boundary wall. He left a huge gap in the wall after hitting it. Then, he went whooshing further into the Jun family's courtyard. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 509. Dies like this. This was the place he had just fought in. This was the place where he had fought the solitary falcon. This was the place he had bravely forced the Snake King to retreat. But it was also the place where he had faced his greatest humiliation. However, the most interesting part was that the Huang ancestor hadn't realized this point at this time. And that's because he hadn't had enough time. He knew that he had evaded the sword. But his keen perception had made him realize that the sword was still chasing in order to kill him. The sword's cold and piercing aura had tailed him closely. It was circling his eyes, throat, and other places. And it would pierce his body the moment the opportunity would arise. Huang Taiyang's escape had come unexpected to his enemy when he had retreated in an attempt to fight for his life. Consequently, he had escaped with his life for the time being. But his enemy hadn't given up on chasing him down. Huang Taiyang's sudden return to the courtyard had surprised the solitary falcon and the others. This old man was cursing us so jubilantly a moment ago. So, how come he's come crashing back through the boundary wall like this? Is he here to kill us while we're off guard? Aren't his guts too dang big? Solitary Falcon and Snake King had defended against Huang Taiyang's attacks with everything they had. But they had still fallen somewhat short. Moreover, the energy they had consumed in this fight wasn't low. The fight had certainly lasted for a short period of time. But those two knew that they had revolved around life and death for each moment of that fight. In fact, this fight had been far more dangerous than the one they had fought outside the Tianfa forest. After all, an expert stronger than the Great Master level wasn't an easy opponent. Therefore, the two of them had snatched this time to circulate their aura instead of rising into the air and looking on with hope. Consequently, they had missed that marvelous scene from a moment ago. Moreover, they could have never thought that Huang Taiyang would run into an assassin as tyrannical that the supreme assassin Chu Qihun by some curious coincidence. Huang Taiyang had been forced to retreat while cutting a sorry figure since he hadn't chosen a proper escape route in his panicked state. Consequently, had knocked through the wall, and had returned to where he was before. However, everyone's doubts were cleared the next moment as a white-clothed figure followed after Huang Taiyang's retreating body. This figure didn't even stop for a moment, and rushed in through that big hole the Huang ancestor's retreating body had created in the wall. In fact, this figure had flown through the chaotic dust and smoke in a graceful manner at lightning-fast speed. Moreover, the sword in his hand was shooting out dazzling sword lights. It was approaching while piercing through the air. The man holding the sword was handsome and tall. His entire body was emitting a cold aura, and his face had a dark and icy expression. It was Jun Moxie. Huang Taiyang gave a loud roar. Then, his body seemingly revolved in the midst of retreating. After that, he changed his direction and continued to retreat with urgency. His body was still rubbing against the floor. But his body had started to leave a trail of the mangled bits of his flesh after he had made this turn. His sleeveless armor had protected certain areas of his body. However, the rest of his body was exposed, such as his shoulders, thighs, hips, and that frantic whirl he had made a moment ago had left the flesh on these areas to get grinded. Consequently, it seemed as if the ground had been stained with the mangled flesh of a pig that was being slaughtered by a butcher. Jun Moxie's sword hadn't stopped. His facial expressions seemed calm and collected. The murderous intent in his eyes was still as vigorous as before. He was a man who could subject himself to cruelties in order to achieve something. So, one could well imagine the level of fierceness he was capable of showing his enemies. He would never allow this person to live on. In fact, his sword's tip had remained less than a foot away from Huang Taiyang's throat even though the latter had changed directions. Huang Taiyang wanted to issue a loud scream, but he couldn't find his voice. His eyes opened wide, and it seemed his pupils would explode. The corners of his mouth were already dripping with saliva. His feet were constantly brushing against the ground at a rapid pace since he wanted to get away. In fact, he was striving so hard that the hardened ground had been etched with trails of his footprints. This had also kicked up much dust in the air. He was trying to use the reactive force from the ground in his futile attempts to escape. But an increasing amount of the flesh on his shoulders, thighs, and posterior had started to become like minced meat. He attempted to pick up pace while retreating. In fact, these dregs of meat had seemingly started to melt on the ground. This powerful expert from the illusory ocean of blood was even stronger than the Great Master level. However, an onlooker would find no flesh on his thighs and shoulders if they were to look at his body. Instead, they would only see his bared dense bones. In fact, even a thick layer of those bones had worn out by now. However, the Huang ancestor wasn't feeling any pain. And that was because his mind had been enshrouded in the possibility of his death. In fact, he would get about to chopping off his head without any hesitation if he were told that he could escape by doing so. And that's because he had already fallen apart, he had thoroughly fallen apart. That sword was like a bone-eating maggot that was chiseling away at his body even though it was persistently aiming at his throat. That expert was even stronger than the great master level. However, he hadn't even had time to get up. Instead, he had been forced into such a horrible situation. He could have decided to resist that sword's attack if he had been in his peak condition. Perhaps, he could have clamped that sword between his chin and collarbone, and could have struck back at the attacker. He could have done that with his strength. But his body had lost the stamina required for something like that since he had suffered from 200 continuous attacks. He knew that he would die if his throat was pierced by that sword. Therefore, Huang Taiyang was struggling to look for any opportunity to stand up, or fight, or even escape. Even the slightest opportunity. However, he had never expected that this man's sword would tail him so closely and terrifyingly. It was needless to talk about an opportunity of standing up, he hadn't even had a chance to blink. The strongest expert of generation. An expert who was stronger than the great masters. An apex expert who roamed the world free and unimpeded in his days. However, he had been brought to such a pitiful condition by an unknown youngster at this time. It was sorrowful, extremely sorrowful. It was the Huang ancestor's sheer will to live which had made him skid along against the friction in his attempt to escape. However, the unceasing friction from the ground meant that he was leaving behind a pool of blood amidst the green smoke that was arising from the burns of friction. In fact, it could be assumed that Huang Taiyang would die on the spot even if Jun Moxie were to stop his pursuit. After all, the old man was unlikely to persist once his mind had loosened up by any margin. That was because the blood in his body had more or less flowed out by now. However, Jun Moxie didn't stop. In fact, he showed no indications of coming to a stop. He genuinely hated it when someone threatened him. And the Huang family's Huang Taiyang had committed this greatest sin. Jun Moxie's intentions had changed from his initial ones. He didn't wish to kill this man anymore. Instead, he wanted this man to grind himself to death. The sword pierced with a whoosh, and Huang Taiyang again dodged it narrowly in desperation. However, his golden armor couldn't bear the strain anymore, and got ripped away from his body with a chi sound. And this resulted in the formation of a new pile of blooded flesh on the ground. But this pile seemed entirely intact. After all, it was the flesh which had previously been preserved by his sleeveless armor. He had lost the flesh above and below his vest area long back. Therefore, the flesh of his vest had basically ended up becoming like an object that was suspended in midair. And this meant that it was bound to fall down at first contact once it had lost support of that golden armor. It was an extremely shocking and bloody sight. It's finally time. Jun Moxie took a long breath. The sound of a small bell's tinkling was heard as he sheathed his sword in its scabbard. Then, he coldly looked at Huang Taiyang, and the corners of his mouth turned into a sneer. The Huang ancestor finally breathed in relief. It was unknown where he found the strength from, but he jumped up to stand. The old man wanted to turn and scram, but he found he had no strength left. He tried to move his aura to heal himself. But he found that his 200 years' worth of hard-earned Xian strength had disappeared as well. Huang Taiyang turned pale with fright, and looked down. However, he found that his chest seemed deflated. In fact, it seemed like there was a big cave in its place. He screamed in pain as one of his hands dawdled to the side. Then, his stomach suddenly fell through. And he could shockingly see the ground through it now. His spine was the only obstruction to the line of sight. But Even his spine was bare on its side. There were no ribs left. Huang Taiyang stared wide-eyed. What's the matter with me? How can I see the ground through my own body? What happened to my body? Where are my internal organs? Where the hell's my back? Where have they gone? He turned with difficulty to look at his own back. Then, he screamed out loudly. After all, he had discovered that his back had disappeared. Or it could be said that it had been grounded to extinction. Only a thin layer remained of his thighs and posterior. He then turned at a loss to look at Jun Moxie and asked, "Where's my flesh?" Jun Moxie frowned as he coldly replied, "It has turned into such a lowly trash that it can't even be fed to the dogs." Huang Taiyang gave a blank "Oh" in reply. In fact, it seemed that he had understood things very clearly. There was a snapping sound as he showed that sign of understanding. This was the sound of his fracturing spine. And he was forced into a sitting-like position because of this. It must have been very painful. But his face didn't seem to be reflecting it. Instead, his expression was still as blank, and he looked stupefied for a moment. Then, a strange smile suddenly appeared on his face. He then muttered in a low voice, "He, when I was young. I had gone to the Valley of the Nine Hidden Lands in those days, he. Inside, there were 4 people fighting to the death. And, surprisingly, all of them were great master-level experts. They were next to done for by that time. And I had promised to fulfill a single wish for each one of them. I had vowed that my flesh would be shredded until I died in case I didn't keep my promise. They believed my oath. So, they made their Xian Qi flow in reverse and transferred it into me because they were at death's door. Consequently, I became a peak expert between dawn and dusk. I first became a sky Xian. And then, I went to the great master level from there. Then, I became even stronger. But I didn't fulfill a single oath I had made to them. Any living man has more work than he can handle. So, who would be interested in fulfilling a dead man's wishes? The death mentioned in the oath I had made was the cruelest of ways to die. But it was also the most impossible way to die, he. His eyes shone as he smiled in pain. He then spoke dully. Is this cruel death the repercussion of the oath I had taken? Is that what this is? Is that what this is? Huang Taiyang could only speak till here when his head tilted. It then snapped as he died in silence. Then, there was a pop, since his spine wasn't able to support his head anymore. So, it broke. And the Huang ancestor's head came down rolling. It rolled for a while before it came to a rest with Huang Taiyang's eyes looking lifelessly at the dark sky. He was the peak expert of his generation. He was stronger than the great masters. However, he had still been forced into this position by a sword. In fact, he had died after he had grinded his flesh to nothingness. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 510. You should take responsibility towards me. Jun Zhantian and Jun Wuyi stared blankly at the scene. Their eyes were fixed straight ahead. Both these men were great generals and had commanded millions of soldiers over their careers. So, what kind of gory sights had they not seen? But they had never seen something so dongade. Moreover, the man in this particular instance was someone who only existed in legends. In fact, he could be considered a supreme master. However, they couldn't help but shudder when Huang Taiyang had spoken out about his oath before his demise. Was this the providence? Is God genuinely watching over us? Are we all on the heaven's path? The corners of the solitary falcon's eyes trembled as he said with a sense of obscurity, "Is he dead?" The Snake King's stunned eyes were staring at that dismembered corpse on the ground. She then spoke up in a matter-of-fact manner. Could he still be alive after something like this? Solitary Falcon trembled with uneasiness. Then, he embraced his own shoulders and rumbled, "Dang it! This is such a fecked up way to die. What kind of a messed up oath did he take back then? Why did he take such an oath? Dang it! You brought this upon yourself. What kind of an oath would bring upon a death wherein even the corpse wouldn't remain intact?" The Snake King took another look at the corpse. She couldn't bear it, and retched. She then covered her mouth and ran away. In fact, her present speed of movements was far superior to the one she had displayed in the fight a while ago. It had genuinely reached a level of greatness at this time. Jun Xie had a complicated look on his face. He stood still for a moment. Eventually, he said, "Let's clean this man and give him a nice burial. The grudges die with the person itself. He must be buried nicely. After all, he was a great master of his generation. It's not morning yet, so everyone should get some rest." Then, Old Man Jun and Jun Wuyi turned away and walked away in silence. The strengths of both these men had upgraded very recently, and their strengths had now reached a level where it was hard for them to find a suitable opponent. The cultivation they now possessed had provided them a certain level of seniority in the society. Therefore, they were rather proud of their strength. But their cultivations were still insufficient to participate in this battle. And the Jun father and son were somewhat disappointed because of this. Then, there was the matter regarding the Snake King and Mei Shuayan. However, Jun Moxie hadn't taken the initiative to introduce them to his family. This indicated that these two individuals were some very mysterious personalities. And Old Man Jun had obviously understood this point rather clearly. Therefore, he ignored this matter, turned to his room, and went to sleep. Mei Shuayan stood not far away. Her white dress fluttered as she sighed. What a pity! An expert above the great master level died here instead of a battlefield. Human nature is so sorrowful. Jun Moxie smiled and said, "Human nature is indeed sorrowful. After all, a person who was even above the great master level turned out to be a man of such despicable character. But, never mind. Miss May, you can't expect everyone to be like you. It's very rare for big-hearted saints to appear on this land. TCH. Anyways, I would prefer to commit suicide if we were to rely on people like Huang Taiyang to save this continent." Mei Shuayan glanced at him. She then sighed and said, "One must consider the strength of the continent. After all, we only have a very few people who possess such staunch strength. And every minute factor can determine the difference between victory and defeat. Moreover, there are even fewer individuals who possess the kind of strength he did. If those outsiders invaded the mainland, entire continent may." Jun Moxie rolled his eyes. He then sneered and said, "The rise and fall of the continent is none of my goddamn business. So, don't talk to me about these irrelevant issues. What difference would it make if those outsiders invaded our lands? It will be a life and death struggle if worse comes to worst. That's all. Don't tell me that each of those outsiders is above the great master level in terms of strength. I won't be able to kill the most powerful ones in case they invade. But I can still slaughter the weaker. Dang right. that can be fecked with once the bird has taken the flight from the nest. How could you even say that? Mei Shuayan felt slightly annoyed. The success or failure of this battle will affect the next 10,000 years. In fact, the entire mainland would be in trouble if those outsiders were to succeed. You belong to mainland. So, how can you not feel any sense of responsibility towards it? Sense of responsibility. I obviously feel some. But, may I offer a piece of advice? Don't compromise on the basic principle of this society for the sake of this god-danged battle. Blind compromises will only help your opponent in proceeding forward in a step-by-step manner. After all, you may be trying to look at the bigger picture here, but others might not be capable of doing the same. Therefore, some disputes will always be there. Take this case for example. It was possible that he may have returned to take revenge if I hadn't killed him. Consequently, the illusory ocean of blood and the Tian Fa forest would have become archenemies. And the disputes would have only gotten bigger and bigger. And the number of dead Great Masters level fighters would have been a lot more in that case. Jun Moxie gave her a cold look. Miss May, I'm telling you this in all seriousness. Even a land full of great masters can lose if defeat is to come. And even a single silver xian can notch a comprehensive victory if defeat is not written on the cards. I'm never afraid of a powerful enemy. But I'm very fearful of fools and pigs. And those on our sides are extremely stupid. Anyway, can anything be taken for granted in a world full of such fickle-minded people? In fact, it's quite possible that the pillars of heaven's mountains may experience another landslide. And it's possible that those donghua aliens might get smashed underneath it. Therefore, they aren't necessarily a matter of concern at this moment if you think about it. So, you might as well think for yourself if you have so much time to think. You must try to look for a charming and handsome husband who can handle you. This is a serious matter. And it's also a major event in every individual's life. Young Master Jun pumped some air into his chest at this point. 4 instances. Me. In fact, you're also aware that I'm an elegant, talented, and good-looking person. I'm like that tree which stands bravely in the face of strong winds. I'm chivalrous and sharp, courageous and king-hearted. I possess enough talent to overshadow the heavens. This proves that I'm your best match. Besides, you even launched an indecent assault on me last night. So, you ought to take some responsibility towards me now. And you must know that this young master didn't make a ruckus over that issue for your sake. This also goes to that I'm a very elegant and noble man. Mei Shuayan blushed for a split second. Then, her finger stretched out towards this shameless man as her whole body started to tremble. However, she had been rendered speechless. She was unable to speak up for a while at first. But she eventually said, You. How can you be so shameless? You have no teeth. Mei Shuayan had moved unhindered in the entire world throughout her life. It could be said that there was rarely a subject that she didn't know about. No matter how or what was said, Mei Shuayan always had her own opinion on the matter. In fact, she was capable of refuting people's opinions to a point where they would be left speechless for a comeback. However, the matter of love and marriage was the only thing that could leave her embarrassed and speechless. This was obviously limited to Jun Moxie alone. In fact, it could be assumed that she would have slapped anyone else into a meat sandwich if they had dared to say something like this. What? No teeth? How is that possible? Jun Moxie retorted as he flashed his teeth. And the 2 rows of his teeth sparkled in the moonlight as a result. It must be said that they were white and spotless. He then smiled mischievously. This young master has a mouthful of healthy teeth. I didn't even eat sugar in my childhood. Moreover, I've never had bad teeth habits. I brush my teeth twice or thrice a day. And I don't have a single tooth that has decayed. So, how can you say that I don't have teeth? Miss May, you even felt my teeth last night. So, how do you not know that I have teeth? Oh, by the way, I've heard assaulting people in an indecent manner is the most shameless thing one can do. So, how can you even say that I'm shameless? How can you possibly say the opposite of the truth? This young master is the one who has truly suffered the losses here. In fact, you must take responsibility towards me. Miss May, you should think about it. Anyway, you were also harassed similarly. After all, you were kissed and groped as well. I was surely helpless in that situation, but I'm willing to accept fate. After all, I've always been an honest and upright man. Jun Moxie finished his speech in an ambiguous and rampant attitude. Then, he said good night in a refined tone. He then hummed a folk tune with satisfaction as he joyously went to his room to sleep. The young girl Mei Shuayan could only watch him leave from behind. However, his silvery teeth were making crackling sounds. The level of this person's shamelessness has genuinely transcended my expectation. How did I come across someone this shamelessness? Oh heaven! Oh Mother Earth! I'm going to die from excess anger. God, please give me another expert like Huang Taiyang. I need to vent my anger. It was hard to say why Mei Shuayan's prayers went unanswered. Perhaps God didn't not hear it. Or perhaps they were very expert of Huang Taiyang's strength. However, Mei Shuayan knew Jun Moxie's words had come as a solemn reminder of one thing, even though he hadn't mentioned it very specifically. The battle for seizing the heavens isn't to be taken that seriously. Preparing everything for this battle has become my own bondage. It's become my weakness. In fact, the three holy lands are contending amongst each other. So, it is possible that they may not be of much use at this time. Jun Moxie had said it in a very confusing manner. In fact, he had said this in a very vulgar manner. But his intentions were very tactful. For instance, Toady. I should have killed Huang Taiyang with my own hands. Mei Shuayan's anger slowly faded away as she thought about these things, and slight smile appeared on her face. It seems that this guy is earnestly thinking about me. The sun came out as usual the next day. The world was precisely the same. It didn't matter who had died yesterday, or how many people died yesterday. The next day's sky still shone brightly above the lands. Huang Taiyang hadn't returned last night. And this had left the illusory ocean of Blood's people rather panic-stricken. The Huang family was as anxious as a cat on a hot tin roof. It must be mentioned that these two places were far apart. But Huang Taiyang was strong enough to make a round trip in a time period as short as an hour. However, a full night had passed by now. So, sufficient time had passed no matter how one looked at it. However, Huang Taiyang hadn't returned the entire night. He had spoken out in a confident manner before he had left, that man is just a country clown. I should be enough on my own. So, why do we need to send so many people? This old man will be back before dawn. You people should arrange the wine for celebrations. In fact, he had strongly refused the illusory ocean of Blood's people for accompanying him. The Huang family had even started to prepare delicacies and drinks that very night. After all, they had hoped that their ancestor would return victoriously. So, they had intended to celebrate the glorious deed of their ancestor. But The eastern sky started to brighten up as time passed, and everyone started becoming impatient. Everyone had started to look desperate by the time the sun came up. Everyone felt as if something heavy and gloomy was pressing down on their hearts. After all, there had been some major sounds of activity the night before. And this was especially true when Huang Taiyang had battled the other two great master-level experts, Solitary Falcon and Snake King. After all, the lands had been sent shaking by the impact of their collisions. And even the people inside the Huang family's residence had felt it. In fact, the soles of their feet had even felt a few vibrations in the ground beneath. Therefore, it was obvious that Huang Taiyang had come across an exceptionally powerful opponent. Moreover, Huang Taiyang hadn't yet returned. Therefore, all the speculations were slowly moving towards the possibility of the worst-case situation. The other four great masters from the illusory ocean of blood had proposed to send reinforcements, but young Lord Huyan Xiao had strictly rejected the idea. Huyan Zhao's reason for calling it off was quite simple: Senior Huang is the most powerful man amongst our team. So, we won't go forth if he can't settle this matter and return safely. After all, we won't be able to resolve this matter if he couldn't. There's a possibility that he may not be able to match his opponent. But what if he fails to escape his opponent? I'm afraid that it will be useless even if all of us follow after him. In fact, we will only add to the casualties. Therefore, everyone will patiently continue to wait. This story will be continued to chapter 511. For those of you who are not subscribed yet, please subscribe. The interesting and best stories will be updated. See you again in the next episode.